Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know, I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. And Trump is destroying the economy while stealing a lot of people's hard-earned money. But Iran, Putin, and China meets to deal with the World War III threat. Let's get into the information. Salute.
Good evening. Welcome to another live stream. We are back for the second in the same number of days. As you can see, I am joined by three very special guests, an incredible panel. Had them on last month, had to get them on again. We are joined by Ray McGovern. He is a former CIA briefer, and I know that he was one of the founders of the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. We have also Larry Johnson, who is a former CIA analyst, and to him, an old fat white guy with an opinion. Yeah. He's great, though. But without further ado, we also have Glenn Deason, who is a geopolitical analyst and a professor at the University, South Eastern Norway?
Yeah, that's correct.
Great. All right, everybody, hit the like button as we get started. That helps boost the stream in YouTube's algorithm. And without further ado, I wanted to start perhaps with you, Larry. Let us begin. It has been a very chaotic day. We saw tariffs on the entire world go into play, and then immediately within hours, we saw all of them be paused for 90 days, except for 120 plus.
That's insider trading. We're going to deal with that. That's not really what the message is going to be about today, but a bunch of insider trading, a bunch of stealing out of people's 401ks, crashing the stock market, buying low. That was disgusting what Trump and them crooks did.
+% tariffs on China. Of course, China has retaliated with tariffs on major U.S. imports, export bans on rare earth minerals, and that tariff is about upwards of 84%. But there's so much going on. There's also U.S. escalations with Iran, Larry. There are indirect talks that are going to be underway in the coming days. And then, of course, we will see what happens from there. The U.S. military is bombing Yemen. And, of course, we still have the Ukraine conflict where Russia is on the offensive, and we also have Russia and Iran speeding up their strategic partnership. So all of this is coming to a head. Trump essentially feels like he's melting down into what has been an incredibly hostile first couple of months under his reign. What do you make of all of this, Larry? What do you find to be pertinent right now in terms of where things are going geopolitically, because it seems quite dangerous?
That's one of those moments where you say, okay, Mrs. Lincoln, other than that thing, how did you like the play? Okay. So some pretty grim things and potentially hopeful things going on. The big problem is that if people are assuming that Trump has sat down, thought through these issues in a critical fashion, asking questions such as, who stands to benefit or lose the most from the tariffs if we impose tariffs on China? Is China going to be hurt worse, or are we going to be hurt worse? If I start military operations in Yemen, do we have the stockpiles of air defense missiles to sustain our presence while also meeting the goals that we have set for ourselves in the Pacific against China? Do we fully comprehend what Russia and Iran's new partnership is in terms of a strategic cooperation? Now, all different issues. And if you're assuming that Trump is asking pointed questions in each of those categories, he's not. I know that. I can't really say how I know that. other than someone with access. He is reacting emotionally. He's reacting from his gut. And let's just take the example of China. China, as a percentage of its total trade, the U.S. has become less important to China over the last 3 years. It's still, I've heard, I've seen estimates between 3% of China's total trade and upwards of 9%. By contrast, the United States sends a lot more in trade to China. And China has been selling off U.S. treasuries and buying gold. In other words, things that if they were looking for a solid relationship with the United States, they would be buying treasuries and selling gold, just the opposite. So Trump has set himself up for a trade war that, based on his assumptions, he thinks he can win. But what I come back and say is look at those assumptions and recognize he can't win. Because I'll close with this one simple example. The U.S. is stepping up its military activities, both trying to support Israel's genocide, still providing support to Ukraine, trying to bomb the stuffing out of the Yemenis, and then also wanting to be ready to go against China. We need missiles, and artillery shells. But I can take you through each of the categories and show you that in all the major, whether they're talking HIMARS or ATACMS, they no longer make those. One of the critical ingredients for the explosives is called antimony. Who produces antimony? That would be China. And between China, there are two alternatives. If we don't get it from China, we can buy it from Iran or from Russia. So if you're calculating from a strategic standpoint, saying, hey, we're going to increase our military activity and we're going to need this critical mineral from China, therefore, let's adopt a policy where we're going to do everything in our power to piss off China. Does that make sense? No.
Glenn, now to you. I wanted your take on not only what Larry said, but also how is Russia dealing with this, what seems to be Trump's approach now, which is escalate with Iran and also essentially send shockwaves throughout the global economy and a trade war with China? How is Russia dealing with this?
Well, I think it might be losing some of the initial hopes they had for Trump, as you said in the introduction.
See, what no one's saying is before Japan. What's the reason Japan attacked Pearl Harbor? Do anybody know? A trade embargo. We were trying to cripple the Japanese economy. And this is really what he's doing to China. He just ratcheted up to 125%. That's really, and you're trying to put an embargo on Chinese goods to help America. That's really why Japan took America to war. Why they attacked Pearl Harbor? Because the U.S. was trying to collapse the economy. What Trump is doing is actually an act of war.
The amount of trouble he keeps bringing on himself is quite extraordinary. That is with Ukraine. The fact that he's back at supplying the weapons, intelligence, and all of this, while we learned from New York Times that this war has effectively been an American war run out of Germany. Now, of course, the negotiations aren't going well. They're responding by threatening Russia with sanctions and, again, sending more weapons. And at the same time, he has his ambitions to ethnically cleanse Gaza. He's gone to war against Yemen. The Russians are quite worried about what could happen in Iran. The consequences of going to war in Iran it would be too unpredictable, and the possible chaos would be too great. And now, of course, it's going to take on an economic war with China. It's quite absurd. So I agree with what Larry said. I think when we look at the economic warfare, it's to a large extent it's a competition to manipulate or shift the symmetry of dependence. That is, when you have two countries who are interdependent, you always have one side which is more dependent on the other. So ideally, each country would like for everyone to be dependent on them while they reduce their dependence on others. Now, you can do many things to reduce your dependence. You can have a lot of strategic autonomy, which China does, so that it is very self-sufficient, and you can also diversify your economic partnerships. The problem for Trump is that they don't really have the same strategic autonomy. They're not self-sufficient to this extent, and also they're cutting themselves off from a lot of centers of power in the world. So they're not reducing the ability to diversify. So if you look now at not just China, but the BRICS countries, which again Russia's leaning heavily into now, is they have all the natural resources to do all the mining, the processing. They have all the industrial capabilities. They have their own tech centers. They have a huge markets in terms of the population who wants to buy this. They're setting up new financial instruments. So across the board, BRICS can be a very self-sufficient grouping, and why this is so absurd is again, as Larry suggested, this is the Chinese can diversify away from the US. I don't see the US being able to diversify away from China. Indeed, even the rare earth metal issues such as antimony is a key problem. There's not enough of it, and given that China has this and also almost completely dominates on the processing of it, so it's I just don't see how China can be beat in this economic war. And keep in mind that China has more than a tariff weapon. They can begin to dump a lot of the US debts, and they can cause a lot of problems, not just as punitive or punishing action, but indeed because they're fearful. If you think that the adversary will start to seize your funds, steal it like they did with Russia, the Europeans as well, by the way, why would you want to sit on this? I think it was Keynes who argued once, if someone owes you $100, then they have a problem. If they owe you $1 million, then you have a problem because you might not get the money. And I think this is what is concerning the Chinese as well as the Russians. So how do Russia respond? Well, I think we see this now. They don't believe anymore that Trump can deliver on a peace deal, which is largely the Europeans' fault as well. So the Russians are now building up for a massive offensive to solve things on the battlefield if there's no diplomatic path. So a lot of things are going very wrong at the moment. So having this economic war with China on top of all of these wars, which promised he wouldn't start, it's just a huge mess. I don't understand what the logic is behind a lot of this.
Ray, and I wanted to bring it to you because everything Glenn just said was spot on. And Sergei Ryabkov, the deputy foreign minister of Russia, recently said that he's seen no indications that the United States is moving to end the Ukraine conflict. Now Russia is calling these talks consultations. So now they're not really talking about negotiations anymore. Russia says consultations with the United States. But not only this, Ray, when Trump was elected, many people believed he was going to at least rein in some of the wars that Biden had launched essentially on multiple fronts. And I wanted to play for you before you react what Donald Trump said just a minute ago about Iran and your take on where all this is leading to.
We said the other day that we do not agree to a potential nuclear deal. It would be very dangerous for them. What specifically?
Well, they can't have a nuclear weapon.
Military action there?
Absolutely.
And we have a
deadline for these talks?
I do. And
You're talking about with Iran?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Do you want something definitive this weekend, or do you see this as the start of a process?
It's a start.
Do you have a timeline?
We have a little time. We don't have much time because we're not going to let them have a nuclear weapon. Can't-
So, Ray, your reaction to where we are given Donald Trump's leadership of the U.S. hegemon?
Well, Danny, all I heard from that conversation, it was very low volume, was at the end when I pressed my earpods here and I heard, "We're not going to let them get a nuclear weapon."
Yes.
Wow. Talk about pushing at an open door, huh? I think Witkoff is smart enough not to push too hard at that open door. He's going to fall flat on his face. I mean, if you can say something good about the U.S. intelligence community, is that they have stood firm for 22 years ago. The Iranian supreme leader said, "No nukes. We don't build nukes." And in 2007, 3-4 years later, the U.S. intelligence community decided unanimously, with high confidence, that Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon right then, at the end of 2003. And if further proof were needed, that has been reaffirmed every year since, including 2 weeks ago at the annual threat assessment, saying that Khamenei, the supreme leader, has not reauthorized the program that he killed 22 years ago. Well, okay. So Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon. So when Netanyahu and Trump and everybody and his brother and sister say, "We're going to make sure that Iran doesn't make a nuclear weapon," what are they trying to do? Okay. Now, the name of the game really is what Netanyahu wanted Trump to do. And that was clear. They met on Monday, okay? Netanyahu wanted Trump to bless, sotto voce if necessary, an attack on Iran. Did he get that? No. What did he get instead? We're going to start direct, says Trump, indirect, say the Iranian, talks on this very issue in Oman on Saturday. What does that mean? Well, who's going to be led? That's going to be led by Witkoff, my personal guy, says Trump. Not Rubio or that guy, Dick Tracy. What is it? Dick Tracy, Hegseth, Dick Tracy head there. No, they're not going to do that. So what's up here? There's room for talks here. I think that somebody got to Trump and said, "Look, did you know that the Iranians have their own deterrent now? Did you know that they successfully hit many bases in Israel? Did you know, as much as you love Israel, it's going to be destroyed? It's going to be destroyed. You hear that, Mr. Trump? It's going to be destroyed if you start a war, if you let Netanyahu start a war, and you help him." What other things? There was some, there's a wisp in the wind here. There were reports, Reuters carried them 2 days ago, that some of the armed militias, some of the Iranian-supported people in Iraq, many of them, like 8 or 10 of them, said, we're going to hold off. We might even disarm. We don't want to pursue this anymore. Whoa. Is that a kind of an olive branch dished out by the Iranians? I don't know, but it certainly is unique, and it can be explained by circumstances. But it seems to me that the Iranians are willing to deal too. The only thing necessary is for Trump to realize, as I think he has, that he's got very, very bad cards, not only on Ukraine, but on the Middle East. And that when Witkoff gets to talk to the Iranians, they're going to say, "Look, we said indirect. Your president said direct. They're going to be indirect. All right. What do you got?" Now, I think Witkoff is going to be smart enough to find out what the Iranians really need, and he'll be on the phone with Trump. I don't know if Rubio or Waltz or that other guy, Hegseth, will be tuned in or not, but that's what's happening, and that's good. That's good because Witkoff has shown himself able to speak for Trump. He may not know much about Iran, and everybody's make a big deal of it. He doesn't have to. All he has to do is deal, and he knows the terms that Trump is willing to settle for. So I see a protracted period now, several weeks at least, of relative less anxiety, with respect to whether Trump is going to let himself be sucked in, mousetrapped into supporting Netanyahu in a war that he has lots of reasons to wage against Iran.
Yeah, Larry, what's your take on where things are going with Iran? Because I'll play one more clip. Hopefully, it is a little better.
Get the volume up.
It's hard with these videos that
All of us old
are,
guys who are hard of hearing, for you know.
What?
let's see if we can hear this.
With Iran, yeah, if it requires military, we're going to have military. Israel will obviously be very much involved in that. He'll be the leader of that. But nobody leads us. We do what we want to do.
Nobody leads us. We do what we want to do.
After he just got through saying, we'll let Israel lead.
Yes.
Yeah, so he says, so yeah, that's what I said. Trump is all over the board. So let's step back and look, objectively at what's going on. Well, the good news is Trump's only demand, the only thing he said that they wanted out of the negotiations was that Iran can't have a nuke. Iran would go, great, we don't have one. And we got Russia and China to verify that, but we will allow you, the United States, to come in and verify. So basically, Trump's going to go back to accepting the old JCPOA, which he withdrew from. Now, items to be negotiated in that are at what level for peaceful use can Iran enrich uranium? And they're doing that collaboratively with Russia as part of the Strategic Cooperation Agreement that was signed on January 17th. But Iran's coming into these negotiations in a much stronger position based upon the meetings this week in Moscow with the Chinese and the Russians. They're when Iran sits down at the table, it can pull over his shoulder and say, "I'd like you to meet my two brothers, my big brothers." So Iran's not going in there with an empty hand. In the past, Trump has intimated that he was going to demand that Iran cut off all assistance to the Houthis and Hamas and Hezbollah. All of that predicated on the assumption that there's a significant amount of assistance. I would say that's questionable, but let's just go with it that would be one of the U.S. demands. It's not clear that Iran will concede on that. But the alliance that Iran signed with the the Strategic Cooperative Agreement on January 17th, which the Duma approved, ratified this week, now puts that, that's envisioned at least a 20-year deal. And it's extremely important because it covers all aspects of both a military relationship that Russia has with Iran, intelligence relationship, diplomatic relationship, and economic relationship, most of all. So the United States, has been pointed out by both Glenn and Ray, Donald Trump's not holding any Trump cards here. In fact, he may be able to come out and declare victory. I think one scenario I hope for is after the meeting, they're going to say, by God, we told those Iranians what the deal was, and that they've agreed they're not going to build a nuclear weapon. Well, they'd already agreed not to do that. But Trump gets to take credit for their agreement. He can tout it as a diplomatic success at a time that really I think he's a little hard pressed, because what he has, I've been guilty of being crude and vulgar sometimes, but last night at that Republican fundraiser, where he said with respect to the 70 nations around the world that are trying to negotiate to not have the tariffs imposed, they're kissing my ass, he said. Now, I guarantee you, at least 80%, if not 100% of those countries that are lining up, as Trump claims, to kiss his ass, are not going out saying, man, let me see if I can buy some chapstick so I can maintain this kind of relationship. I love kissing Trump's ass. I think he has incentivized more countries to figure out how to join BRICS to separate from this kind of U.S. bullying and hegemonic imbecility.
No, I think those are all very good points. And Glenn, given what Larry just said too, that it seems to me that Russia, China, and Iran are really moving into a global leadership role. Larry just mentioned the nuclear talks, which have started before Donald Trump can even meet with the Iranian representatives. So, and this only touches the surface of the cooperation. What do you make of this development, this trend? And it seems like Trump is worsening this. Trump is actually making this process accelerate.
Yeah, well, these are three large giants on the Eurasian continent now. A key logic for Russia and China was that the Russians face NATO, led by the US, on its western borders. China faces the US off its coast on the east, so they kind of had to have their back-to-back as a way of staying safe. Now, it makes sense to pull in Iran to some extent into this. And indeed, you heard this coming from Tehran for a few years now, that their main strategic partnerships should be organized with Moscow and Beijing, as this would allow them to set up alternative economic institutions. Indeed, this is why Iran also has been embraced now with and will get access to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well as BRICS. So it also makes sense now for the Russians and the Iranians to do more military cooperation, especially after the way they cooperated in Syria and also Iran's support during the Ukraine war. So they're getting much closer, and it just makes sense in order to have collectively to be able to reduce dependence on the West, but also to build up proper the defense. Now, this being said, it's worth noting that if Trump wants a political or a deal with the Iranians, that Russia could be an important partner, because Russia doesn't really want Iran to have nuclear weapons either, neither does China. So they could be important partners to observe any agreement which is made. But I think the Russians, as well as the Chinese, for that sake, they look at this efforts to renegotiate the JCPOA with the Iranians as being deeply flawed. Keep in mind that what is being asked now of Iran is largely to give up its deterrent. That is, they're arguing because, as both Ray and Larry said, they don't have a nuclear weapon. So what is it that Trump wants? Well, he doesn't want them to be a threshold state, so they have to eliminate their material capabilities. They also want them to reduce their missiles, the distance they can reach. They want them to cut support for Yemen, Hezbollah, Hamas. So effectively to give up its security and hand it over to the United States and Israel, and hope that by subordinating itself that they won't do anything bad to Iran. And this is the main problem. You can't really threaten someone to give up their deterrent, because by threatening them, you only make it clear why they need a deterrent. I mean, this should be common sense. And no, I think the partnership with China and Russia, it can work both ways. On one hand, if the US decides to increase sanctions or use military force, then they can provide some form of support. But also, if the US wants to make a deal with Iran, it's not in Russia's or China's interest to have to have Iran close down important maritime transportation corridors and shut down effectively the global economy. It's not in their interest. So they can function as a partner for peace, or they can, if the US goes to war against Iran, they would be a partner of Iran instead. So they do have an interesting role in this.
Ray, of course, the United States is at war at the moment in Yemen, and of course through its support for what is happening in Gaza and Palestine. When it comes to Yemen, though, what an interesting point that's been made by many is that the United States seems to be struggling quite a bit. Even the Western mainstream media, including the New York Times, are sounding the alarm about the amount of money that is being spent and the amount of munitions that are being used to essentially fight a so-called enemy that is still showing that it can fire missiles into Israel and also chase the USS Harry Truman from the Red Sea with its drones. And I think they've downed another MQ-9 Reaper drone. I'm talking about Ansarallah. Your reaction to this not so talked about a war, as we're talking about tariffs, we're talking about Ukraine and Iran, but this is raging right now. What has been your impressions of this?
Well, first, Danny, this is a war unauthorized by Congress or by anybody else. This is a war that Trump and his military decided to wage against, it brings back memories. When was the last time we did a war against naked brown feet running through the jungle who could never contend with the United States of, I think that was called Vietnam, So what did we do? Oh, we sent more troops over there until we reached 536,000 troops. Now, we never learned, because right after World War II, the French general, hero of that war, Leclerc, was sent out to Indochina to find out how many troops it would take to get Indochina back for France. And he reported dutifully after 5 months, it would take 500,000 troops. And even then, we could not do it. No. Well, it turned out to be right. Okay. So the Yemenis may have bare feet. They may have curved daggers, but they also have hypersonic missiles. Sooner or later, they could hit one of our ships. And they're not, the U.S. is just, the Navy is going to show itself as really not capable of doing much. Let me just finish this little thing by saying that I see that the word as phantasmagoria. I used to say other words for Trump, but I think phantasmagoria is what he's guilty. That's a highfalutin way of saying what that little kid said about the emperor in Hans Christian Andersen's tale. He's got no clothes on. Nobody's willing to tell him he's got no clothes on. And let me close my little remarks here by something I just fished out from my files. 75 years old. I was just a boy at the time, but the fellow's name was Mao Zedong. He was Chinese. And this is what he said, quote, "The U.S. is a paper tiger. At present, it may seem powerful, but when looked at in a broader perspective, as a whole, and from a long-term viewpoint, its policies are disliked by people right and left because the U.S. oppresses and exploits them internally and abroad. For this reason, the tiger is doomed, period," end quote, from selected works of Mao Zedong. Okay, now, what am I saying? When I first heard that, when I first read that, I was just a young lad, of course, but come on, the U.S. will never, never suffer that kind of defeat. Well, if you have phantasmagoria, it's a real disease, then that could bring on this kind of defeat. And that's what's going to be likely, except this king, while he may have no clothes on, does have nuclear weapons. And that's why I applaud Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and others who are trying to let this king down gently. I am not in despair of an accord on Ukraine. I think it's going to come. And I also think that the talks this Saturday in Oman will bring some relief to the notion that Trump might have had intended to support Netanyahu's wish to have a war in Iran. So there are good things and there are bad things. And I think this week has more good things than bad things. Last thing I just say, it was really interesting. Monday, I was intensely looking at what was going on in the White House, of course, with Netanyahu and Trump. So were the three experts from China, Russia, and Iran in the Kremlin watching the tube to see what was likely to happen. And I'm convinced that when Trump said, oh, we're going to talk to Qatar, we're going to send Witkoff over there. Well, they said, yes, finally, Trump is beginning to listen, and Netanyahu is going to go home pretty much empty-handed. Now, that may be too optimistic, but that's what I think really happened. And I have to add always that as long as Trump as president of the United States supports, enables, arms, and weaponizes genocide in Gaza, that should be the focus of every citizen above and beyond any of these other big strategic considerations. We have to stop that. We have to make sure that this naked president realizes that we're not going to support genocide for very much longer.
Yeah, and Larry, Ray just mentioned Netanyahu's reaction. There have been videos circulating of Netanyahu's face changing when Trump said he was going to talk with Iran and announced it publicly. But I wanted your a follow-up and take on the U.S.'s overall situation in West Asia, because Trump continuously says that U.S. military force is going to be used against Iran if it doesn't essentially cave into U.S. demands, and is right now in a major military escalation war with Yemen, one that, as Ray and I have said, are causing a lot of concerns about the U.S.'s situation and its position there. Your thoughts about what's going on in West Asia and what direction this is heading, if you agree with Ray about the de-escalation that might be coming as well.
Trump would be wise to learn an old child poem, a poem for children. If wishes and butts were candy and nuts, it would be Christmas every day. Well, okay. Trump's got all these great wishes. Oh man, we've got the best military in the world. We can beat anybody. We're so strong. We're so mighty. We're going to have to boost the budget to $1 trillion now. What? And so I started looking up the inventory on certain weapon systems. The HIMARS, as an example. Guess, and Danny, this is not the place to up the chump, but how many HIMARS missiles a year do you think the United States produces? Remember,
60-ish?
We're the greatest industrial power ever.
60-ish?
Yeah,
less than that?
48 to 60.
40. Oh.
Okay. Now, when they fire them off in like Ukraine, they're firing out 4 or 5. So, that goes pretty quick in 12 days if you're firing 4 or 5 a day. Same with ATACMS. They only make between 200 to 500 a year. Same with Patriot missiles. So all of a sudden, you've got this limited production, and yet these ships that are sailing in to the Red Sea, they are carrying a missile that's is part of a vertical launch system, and those, once they're fired, the only way to reload those tubes, so the tubes are placed into the deck, is you'd have to sell that ship to a nearby port, and with a crane, they have to be reloaded. But the problem is they don't have an unlimited supply of those missiles. So what Trump is running up against in his Operation Rough Rider is, I guess they changed the name. I learned that today from Alex Craner. It started off in December of 23 as Operation Prosperity Guardian, was a complete bust for the Biden administration. And then here comes Trump and his team on March 15th. By God, we're not a bunch of inept incompetents like that Biden team. We're going to show those Yemenis. And since they've started the operation, the Yemenis in just the last 3 weeks have shot down 3 MQ-9 Predator drones that go out the door for at least a minimal cost of $30 million a pop. So, right there, they're almost 100 million. And reports in the media say that they're costing 1 billion. Okay. So what does this matter to the region? Well, if you're any other country in the region and you were always afraid of, man, the great and powerful Oz, he's spoken. We've seen the big head. We've heard the big voice. What they're seeing now is the curtain's getting pulled back, and the United States is more like that little old man, a nasty, malevolent little old man, mind you, behind the curtain. That, we can't stop Yemen. We have to be fearful that they're going to shoot a missile and take out one of our ships. They're already shooting down our Predator drones, and those are relevant because those Predator drones are really the only kind of weapon the United States has in theater that can strike real time. From an intelligence standpoint, the drone operator can spot a mobile missile system on the ground and then use that immediately to attack that target. Without that Predator drone, the United States is basically blind. It's hit and miss. They'll never be able to locate and hit one of those mobile missile complexes. So if you're Iran, and hell, if you're Saudi Arabia or anybody else, you look at the United States going, what the, they're not actually as good as they said they were. And that's not the message Trump wanted to convey, but that's a message that's being sent. So Trump he's going to be learning a hard lesson in the next few weeks, particularly if he decides to attack Iran, that the United States military is not as competent and capable as he thinks it is.
Yeah, Glenn, your comments on what you're witnessing. I know you have written a lot about Eurasia, speak a lot about Eurasia and the development of this multipolar world. What's your reaction to this point that Larry made? Because for me, as an American, you understand the United States views it's an empire, and military superiority, the ability to project power militarily is critical. Not only critical, but actually it's almost dependent on it now. But yet, as Larry just intimated and demonstrated, this is waning itself, despite Trump's rhetoric that the United States is so strong and has the biggest and strongest weapons. What have you made of this, and how does it, shape how you're viewing what's happening in West Asia right now?
Well, I think the example from Yemen is quite clear that the United States is exhausting itself, if not even disarming itself. And this is the key problem. As Larry pointed out, these are very expensive weapons. It takes a lot of work to reload. Let's use that word. But overall, I think it fits into what many people predicted. That is, in the beginning of the 90s, when the United States was looking at what kind of an international system should be built after the Cold War. The idea was to have one based on hegemony, dominance, and part of the idea was that no countries should even be able to aspire towards competing against the United States. So this image of absolute dominance and superiority, it's really at the core of the global hegemon, exactly because no one will even try to match the US because it is so powerful. This isn't that different from what Israel does in the region either. That is, it can get away with a lot because if it has this image of being all powerful and effectively destroying anyone who goes against it, this image it often can result in not having to use force if everyone fears that you have overwhelming force. Now, over time, of course, the United States, as many predicted from the 90s, it will begin to exhaust itself. That is, when you transfer all this wealth and resources from the core to the periphery, And I think, this is what you see now. And as the United States weakens itself, the rest of the region is also taking a note. As it's not, decimating, destroying Yemen. Instead, they see that the U.S. Has a lot of weaknesses. And what does this mean for the hegemonic system? Well, global primacy or hegemony, it really depends on alliance systems, because you divide the world into your adversaries, which are contained, and your allies, which are which become dependent. So this is why it's good to keep Europe divided, to keep the Germans and Russians on the opposing side. This is why it's concerning if peace breaks out in the Middle East in terms of the Arabs and Iran getting along. But the alliance system has also been kept alive because the belief that the US will have the final say in any major security issue. But as we say now, if they can't defeat the Houthis in Yemen, why would you entrust your security? Why would you outsource your foreign policy? So I think America's hand is being weakened across the Middle East. So, and I think in this vacuum, you're going to have a lot of multipolar alternatives, which is why China has been pushing for ending some of this rivalry between, for example, Saudi Arabia and Iran, simply because that would diminish the whole alliance system, which has divided the region. So, no, I see. I think everyone more or less now recognizes that the era of global hegemony has come to an end. Even Marco Rubio pointed this out, that this time is now over. And I think this should be more reflected in America's military policy. There was a time when America prided itself of carrying a big stick and speaking softly. Now the stick is becoming much smaller and spouting a lot of vulgarities. So I think I think America needs to go back to its roots. So rebuild its strength and not deplete all its resources.
I just want to remind everyone, if you're watching, do hit the like button. That helps boost the video out further. Ray, I wanted to get you back in here, and Glenn, I know that you have to leave at the hour, so please do feel free to do that if you need to. But Ray, I wanted to ask you a final comment on this question of U.S. military power projection in West Asia. You've briefed U.S. presidents. And what would you say to them now about this, the consequences of an attack on Iran, given what we have witnessed with U.S. warfare and aggression on Yemen?
Thanks, Danny. But before Glenn leaves, let me ask him a question, since he's the only one of us who has met with Vladimirovich Putin. I think it matters. What's your take on him, Glenn? How did he come across to you?
Putin.
Yeah.
Well, he's on that topic. That Theodore Roosevelt. I think this is, to some extent, I think what he's following as well is attempting to speak more softly, but also carrying a big stick. And indeed, you do see that when he addresses the audience, he's quite courteous. He avoids too belligerent language. I mean, he kept referring to the Western countries as partners long into the proxy war, even as we call him Hitler, and there's evil in his eyes. So so I think the politeness is there. I mean, and even various American presidents and political leaders around the world have recognized that he's also very, very smart. He knows what he's doing. So I think he's careful not to close the door to possible peaceful solutions. And I think this is one of the things we've gotten wrong with Putin. We always got this idea that Putin is simply, this, KGB thug we're presenting him as always looking to beat up his adversaries. But I think this narrative neglects how many times over his 25 years at the presidency, when he has attempted to reach out and find some political settlement with the West. But as Putin has said many times as well, the main reason, the main source of all conflicts between the West and Russia was this failure after the Cold War to set up a mutually acceptable post-Cold War settlement. That is, we kept the dividing lines, but then gradually moved them towards the east instead of getting rid of them. And this has been the source of why everything's been, all European affairs has become a zero-sum game. This is why when we talk about European integration, it means decoupling countries from Russia, even though it's the largest country in Europe. So I think I think it's a guy who can deal with. This is now we're not really allowed to say this. I mean, if someone journalist from my country is watching this, I will be a Putinist in the paper tomorrow. But even Bill Clinton made this point, that he always kept his word. When he said he would do something, he did it. So it's a person that you could work with. And these days, of course, we keep saying that Putin is that he breached all trust. It's not a man we can work with because we can't trust him. But why? Well, because he invaded Ukraine. But that's proof you can't trust him. He said, we will take military force unless you give us some security guarantees. You can't move in. NATO can't move into Ukraine without giving us security guarantees. We will take action. He did exactly what he said he would. So it's not his trustworthiness. He did what he said he would. So no, I think again, you can quote many Western leaders who pointed this out. You can work with him. He does what he says, and so I think demonizing him. I think it was Henry Kissinger. He said it back in 2014. I think that the demonization of Putin is not a policy; it's an absence of thereof. So I think this is the best way to understand it. So that's why I think the demonization of Putin, almost as a loyalty pledge in the West now, is one of our greatest weaknesses.
I agree. Now, let me just point out that I think that you might be called a Putin versteher. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I take some solace in the notion that Angela Merkel is saying, I am a Putin versteher. It's stupid not to understand Putin. And she said, the West played a role in what happened in Ukraine. So there's a little bit of lessening of this Putin versteher thing. And I hope that your colleagues in Norway give you a little slack there and don't brand you right off the bat as being kind of a leper, as has happened here. Well, thanks very much. You, as I say, have dealt with Putin, or you've been with him, and that's really important. What I would say on this is that, we were the hegemon. When the Soviet Union fell apart, Putin reached out. They even asked Clinton, "Is it okay if I join NATO?" And Clinton said, what? Oh, let me talk with my team. God, comes back and says, oh, my team says no. Okay. So what I'm saying here is that hegemony is over for the United States, and that's something we have to get rid of. Now, after our only, in my memory, since World War II, win war against feckless Iraq in 1991, Paul Wolfowitz, Deputy Secretary of Defense, was asked by a prominent general, what's the lesson you learned from that? Great job, Paul, way to go. And Paul said, well, the lesson we learned for that is that we could do these things and the Russians can't stop us. That's a quote, okay? Well, that was 1991. Then we decided to do Iraq in 2003. Did the Russians stop us? No, they couldn't stop us then. What happened in Syria 2015? The Russians stopped us for the nonce for the next several years. The Russians can stop us now. As a matter of fact, I've been around a while, so maybe this would make an impression when I say that for the first time in my professional career, the Russians are better than us in weaponry. Now, strategic weaponry, that's kind of, going to use that anyway, and we're equal in that. But all kinds of other weaponry, not only the Russians, but the Chinese have caught up. And that's a shift in the balance of defensive power, okay? And so when you go back to Mao Zedong and he says, this is a paper tiger, well, the problem is that the paper tiger has become a paper tiger, but it doesn't realize it, and it still has nuclear weapons. So no longer can we work our will wherever we want without the Russians stopping us and the Chinese stopping us. And that plays a big role in the Persian Gulf. And in my view, the Russians and the Chinese, through private channels, are telling Trump, look, don't even think of letting Netanyahu mousetrap you into a war against Iran.
Can I add one quick thing? Because I feel for 30 years, the main discussion we've had, or one of the key discussions about European security architecture, or indeed the global world order, was, is hegemony a good thing or a bad thing? So good, we meant, it allows us to elevate, liberal democracy, to mitigate security competition, all of this. Against, of course, was it excessively dependent on coercion, and so you get Iraq and this kind of disasters. But now, this discussion can be retired, because it's not whether or not it's good or bad, it's objectively over. This is what indeed Marco Rubio also recognizes. The unipolar order is over, so we have multipolarity. And that means there has to be a real shift in policy if we recognize that this is the case. Because under unipolarity, the main idea was, well, we don't have to really accommodate Russian security concerns. They might, as the Clinton administration recognized, they might be very upset with us if we expand NATO. But again, who cares? We're all dominant, they're weak. We don't have to take into consideration. And in just to do one more Henry Kissinger quote, because he also wrote in 2014 that was a bit taken aback or about how the rhetoric was now focused around the idea of defeating Russia. And he was making the argument that if we recognize that Russia is a great power, which he believed they were, then we have to look at ways, the areas where our key main strategic interests can be harmonized. Where can we actually make a deal? This is the main direction of diplomacy, instead of taking solace in the idea that we don't have to take into consideration their security concerns. So I think this is given we know that hegemony is over, we have to recognize the main security concern of other great powers. This is just it should be common sense, but I don't see anyone moving in this direction. And you need the Americans, the Chinese, and the Russians especially to come together and map out how we cannot step on each other's toes, because well, not me, I'm not part of any of these great powers, but the Americans and Russians and Chinese certainly are. So no, I think this is the direction that we should be going. But there's still a behavior as if we're living in the unipolar order, even though there's a recognition that it's gone.
Yeah, let me follow up on that. As far as the United States is, and Trump in particular, they're ignoring the principle that your actions help inspire, motivate, or deter what other people do. And what the United States has posted on the White House webpage with respect to the tariffs is, they say explicitly that other countries have been getting a free ride from the United States because we've been providing military security around the world. Now, I think the people in Iraq and Afghanistan and Somalia and Libya and Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos, they might disagree with that characterization, but let's just go with it. And that therefore, these countries, they ought to be getting out their checkbooks and writing a check to the United States because we're so great and they need to pay us back for everything we've done. Now, that attitude, in my experience, will lead people to not say, you know what? I want to be friends with the United States. They are such great people. They're generous, they're kind, and they're going to leave us the hell alone. It's just the opposite. These people are now being, it's the mafia tactic. They come, you're running a deli or you're running a dry cleaner, and the two guys show up and say, hey, you need to pay your security tax. And the guy goes, oh, I don't have a problem. Oh, you do now. They start breaking things up and punching them in the face. And then the store owner pays up and he gets left alone for a while. That's what the United States is doing. It's a form of loan sharking. And you can only get away with that for so long because all these other countries are going to go, whoa, wait a second. This is why China, Russia, India, Brazil, South Africa started BRICS. That's why Iran's coming into BRICS. That's why Iran and Russia signed that part of that security cooperative, their comprehensive security agreement entails the North-South corridor, the transport corridor, that's going to free Russia of being dependent upon choke points in the Dardanelles or in the Baltic Sea. And I anticipate, look at Vietnam. Vietnam thought, the United States, we're now buddies. And man, United States savaged them with tariffs. And, there was that little thing called the Vietnam War where, probably a couple of million Vietnamese got killed by us, that they may not be as forgiving about that as we think. So all I'm saying is that what Trump's actions, whatever short-term benefit he thinks it's going to gain in the United States, it is going to lead to an acceleration of BRICS as a viable economic alternative and a weakening of U.S. Hegemonic influence in the world.
I just want to say, everyone, be sure to hit the like button as you continue watching. I want to say, Glenn, if you do need to go at the hour, feel free. If you want to stay, you can stay. That's great. Yes, Ray.
Quick question to Glenn. Norway is part of Europe, right? What's your take on the misbehavior of the Europeans? Do you think that if Trump really wants to do a deal with Putin on Ukraine, that the West Europeans have the wherewithal to put the kibosh on it?
Well, I don't quite understand the rationale at the moment, because the idea is, if the United States is going to pull away from this war, then the Europeans should fill the shoes, effectively. This is the idea, but it's a very strange proposition, because we already ran out of weapons to send, and if we couldn't defeat the Russians with America, obviously we're not going to do it with the Americans, and they also never really defined what it means to defeat the world's largest nuclear power either. It's who considers this to be a fight for its existence. So there's a lot of flaws behind this, and also there's a lot of deceptive language being used. So, for example, if you look in the papers here, you have our politicians and media writing, well, Europe, we have to take an important role in any ceasefire. We can contribute by sending in troops once the ceasefire starts. And this is sold as a way of helping to ensure that there's a proper ceasefire, but it's very deceptive, because this is a way of sabotaging the ceasefire, because there's no way Russia, which invaded for the very explicit purpose of preventing soldiers from NATO countries from entering Ukraine, that somehow they're going to accept that the Europeans move in. And this is one of their main concerns. If there is a ceasefire, that the British and other Europeans will send troops into Ukraine and set them up as tripwires. So this is a way of sabotaging it. There's some push now that maybe France should speak, or Macron should go and speak to Putin. And but I don't know. It's very strange. There's this assumption that this is this is a moral thing not to talk to the opponents. even as hundreds of thousands of young men die on the front, and they're fighting in the war, which most Ukrainians want negotiations, but still they're convinced in their own moral superiority that by not talking to Putin, then this is reaffirms how good we are, and if we do talk to him, it's a way of rewarding. So no, I'm a bit disheartened by the very unconstructive role played by Europe, and this is with Trump in the room. Like he's the sensible person here, which is not doesn't put Europe in a very good light.
Larry, let's bring you back in here. And we can maybe close the show's last 20 or so minutes with this analysis of the overall situation. When Trump came into office, there was some optimism about, okay, at the very least, can we prevent a global conflagration, a massive one, a potential World War III scenario when it comes to Russia, the US, and perhaps that would bring some stability in the world. But of course, we've seen lots of contradictions in those talks there and how Trump's addressed it. We've also now seen the United States escalate in West Asia to a significant degree. Now we're talking regularly about a possible war with Iran. Yeah. And of course, this $1 trillion military budget has already been very vocally targeted by people like Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump at China, not least the moving now of whatever naval resources are left of the United States, even to the Panama Canal. So there's all kinds of saber rattling and threat of war out there. What have you made of all of this? Can Trump, because it seems like the United States under Trump is still operating on the assumption that it can arrest these major rising powers to the east, and that it can do so through the mechanism of war. What's your take on this?
Trump's unpredictable conduct is making it easier for other countries to say, look, we don't know what the hell the United States is going to do. We can't predict what Trump is going to do. We don't know if he'll follow through on his verbal threats or not. So what we have to do is we have to take care of our interests first and foremost, and would not rely upon any promise given by Trump. It's going to have to be completely demonstrated and verified. So in that respect, Russia remains open to talking to the United States. They have not shut the door. They still keep open the lines of communication based upon things that Trump has said, based upon what the United States has done in terms of supplying intelligence to Ukraine, and intelligence and weapons that have been used to carry out attacks inside of Russia. Russia would be fully entitled to tell the United States to go to hell and to either stop it, or they're going to start shooting our reconnaissance planes down, for starters. I mean, and there are those in Russia actually demanding that Putin do that. So Trump has demonstrated he's not listening to the Russians. He's still saying, well, they got to make concessions. No, they don't. They're winning. In fact, they're offensive. People are expecting a big offensive. It's in my judgment, it's already started. The Russians just aren't going to announce it with a gender reveal party. Okay, they're the speak softly but carry a big stick crowd, and they're advancing all along the line of contact from north to south. So Trump, despite his promise that he'd get this thing settled in 24 hours and maybe 100 days, Russia's not going to settle, because the United States is not willing to make the kinds of concessions that the United States needs to make in order to convince Russia that we're a reliable negotiating partner. And Russia will retake what's now, what we knew as Novorossiya, They will fully occupy all of Ukraine up to the Dnieper River before this is done. And the United States won't be able to do a damn thing about it.
Yeah, and Ray, this has reverberations for the entire world. What's happening, especially on the battlefield, where Russia is continuing to go on the offensive, showing that this is going to be a long process. I know that you believe eventually a deal will be done, but it seems like it's going to take some time. And we also have now Trump dealing very aggressively with Iran and with China. And the fear was during the Biden administration that all of this would lead to an even worse outcome than what we already had, which was a genocide in Gaza, on the precipice of war, possibly Israel, at least led and U.S. facilitated with Iran, and of course, ongoing and potentially disastrous direct confrontation with Russia. What's changed in your mind about this situation now under Trump? It seems like while some of the form of it has changed, that there's been a lot of continuity.
You're on mute.
Here.
There you go.
Whoops.
You're back. You're back.
Yeah, you're back.
Don't tell my wife how to mute me, please.
Yeah.
Okay. I think Larry is right that unpredictability is the byword here. But you have prominent Russian officials saying, look, we were close to World War III under Biden, Blinken, Sullivan, and those people, okay? Now we're not. As a matter of fact, I have to emphasize that just a week ago or so now, maybe 10 days, when Putin was up there in Murmansk on a submarine and talking to the sailors, and they're asking him questions. And he says, look, in my opinion, Trump is worthy of trust. That's in my opinion. We can deal with trust, in my opinion. Same paragraph twice, in my opinion. And then he says, Nadeus, I hope that this is not going to end up like last time when we get diddled by Trump. All these betrayals that you know about, which he had already rehearsed earlier in his little talk. Now, Nadeus, the word for I hope, really means I expect, okay? I assure you, okay? It was a bad translation by the Kremlin. I assure you this is not going to happen again. Okay, now what does that mean? That means that Putin is winning the war and that Trump is a transactional guy, smart enough to realize that his cards are really, really poor cards, and he's going to have to play. Does Trump want a deal? I believe Trump does want a deal. So does Putin, okay? Now, this matter of trust, my God, that has been absent since 2013, when Obama and Putin trusted each other enough to avoid a major war in Syria. Okay, we know that story. That's 2013. 2014, 6 months later, the likes of Victoria Nuland did that coup in Kiev, and then trust plummeted. Now they're talking about it again. And Putin, despite people behind him, the military behind him, the people that say, oh, you're trusted too much, and despite Putin's own admission, yeah, you're right, I made a mistake. I trusted these guys in the past. Now he keeps saying, I trust these. In my opinion, they're serious about working out a deal. What does that mean? It means he wants a deal rather than just go ahead and complete his conquering of Ukraine. He wants the kind of mutual security deal that was possible back in December of 2021, and that Jens Stoltenberg, head of NATO, bragged about, saying, we said no to that deal. And so Putin said, okay, then I will invade Ukraine. And so he did. And what does Stoltenberg then say? He says, and the good news is that we got NATO enlargement anyhow. Sweden and Finland. Okay, so much for that. Now, it doesn't matter to Stoltenberg that the flower of Ukrainian youth is dead now because of these stupid decisions. I think that Putin has enough trust. I use the word advisedly because Putin does, and that Trump will come around to say, well, look, I got very poor hands here, but Putin's willing me to, well, let's say Odessa could become an international port or something. He's willing to give me enough to let me down easy. I'll take it. Okay. I think that's what's in store for Ukraine. It's going to take a month or two more, in my view, maybe more. But meanwhile, the focus is on Iran. And I think Putin and Xi and their trilateral meeting there in Moscow, the day after Netanyahu was in the White House, they breathed a sigh of relief and said, okay, now Qatar is next. Let's see what happens on Saturday. See if Trump and Witkoff, his Rasputin, if you will, or his guy, is going to come to any more sensible arrangement. And I think they are. And I'm breathing a lot easier this week than I was just about 10 days ago.
Glenn, I'm glad you're still here. Give your impression, anything that you want to react to with what was just outlined here.
No, not really. No, I just think that yeah, a lot of the same mistakes are being done over and over again. We spoke about this idea that Iran can be threatened to give up its deterrent and security. We say the same now with BRICS. That is, Trump says, if you dare to diversify away from the dollar, I'll put tariffs on everyone. I mean, and we'll put sanctions on you. It only proves again the need to diversify, to reduce the excessive dependence on the dollar. And I think it's we're going to see the same now on the battlefield in Ukraine. I mean, Marco Rubio made the point that if the Russians really want peace, then they wouldn't attack. But there is no ceasefire in place. The idea seems to be that if Russia wants peace, then it should suspend all hostilities on the battlefield until there's an agreement. But then the incentive for making peace to accept a political settlement, which is very difficult to get acceptance for both in Ukraine and across the West, is gone. So we have all these very strange ideas, and now now the Europeans again, as I said, are gonna threaten to send troops. Everyone's gonna arm themselves to the teeth and try to send as much weapons as possible to Ukraine. All it does is convince the Russians that there is no reliable avenue towards a negotiated peace agreement. So this is why they're building up for now an offensive. And I agree with what Larry said, by the way, that this has probably already begun, because there's some huge movements which you see in the Donbass area, but also coming up from the south in Zaporozhye, that there's huge movements already underway. So I think this is a snowball which will only intensify. So it's quite possible that it's already begun. So no, it's very frustrating to watch this. It's a lot of things which should be common sense, such as don't threaten a country to give up its deterrent. It's that this won't work. It should be obvious, but for some reason it's not. So
Yeah, and Larry, with what Glenn just said, it made me think about how I think a lot of people actually underestimate the strength of now these three countries that are consistently on the US's radar, essentially the three biggest countries that the United States wants to contain and weaken, and with Russia, China, and Iran. What do you say to those people? Because a lot of people get frustrated. Iran hasn't launched Operation True Promise 3. Why hasn't Russia toppled and destroyed, Ukraine's army 100% completely and just gotten this over with? Why is China continuing to play a balancing act economically and otherwise? What do you say to those people, given that you now have and especially in recent years, extensive experience traveling to Russia, all of that?
Yeah, so let's come up with benchmarks. let's use the United States experience in Afghanistan as a benchmark. After 20 years, the United States failed to take control and contain the Taliban, who were armed only with sidearms, a few mortars, and a few heavy machine guns. They had no artillery, no tanks, no armor, no air power. And they essentially fought us to a standstill for 20 years. So I don't want to hear a single former U.S. general open their mouth at any kind of criticism of Russia, because what Russia has done is the progress in the Donbass has been slow through Luhansk, but particularly Donetsk, because the Ukrainians had 8 years in which to build up fortifications underground, heavily fortified mines and other facilities that Russia has been slow in taking in order to avoid significant casualties on its side, but in the process inflicting significant casualties on the side of the Ukrainians. So, that all these Westerners say, see, Russia's weak because they're not moving fast. Hey, who the hell are you to talk? Petraeus, Ben Hodges. I mean, we go down the list of all these clowns. They couldn't beat the Taliban, a bunch of goat herders with automatic rifles. So it's like, shut up. You've got no room to talk. So the Russians, they're in no competition. They're in no hurry. What's fascinating is, we can go back over the history of the last 3 years. You remember in the first year, we were told every month, oh, Russia's running out of missiles. Any day now, they're running out. They're next week, they're going to be out, out, gone, zero. Russia kept building. When the M777 howitzer was introduced, that's going to be a game changer. Now we find out that not only is the United States not producing any more of them, so they don't have any, and they can't produce enough artillery shells to keep the Ukrainians in stock, and they don't have replacement barrels because the barrels have been burned up. Then you get the same story with the TACMs, with the HIMARS, with the Patriots, all the Wunderwaffen, the F-16s. The United States has thrown everything, including intelligence, including targeting information, and it has not stopped the Russians. And in fact, Cavoli, while not trying to admit the reality, the general in charge of European Command, in his testimony before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee last week, conceded that, yeah, Russia's lost all these people, so they claim, and yet we can go over the history of U.S. military, has not gotten any damn estimates right. Going to Vietnam, to Afghanistan, they've always gotten it wrong, usually doubling and tripling the estimate when it's, much less. But conceded that despite losses, the Russians are recruiting at a rate of 30,000 a month. Their army has grown to be 1.5 million. Yeah, they lost all these tanks and vehicles, except they've replaced them all. Their industrial capability is such that they can replace everything. While the United States, we don't even build Bradley fighting vehicles anymore, so we can't replace those. And yeah, Russia's producing 1,500 tanks a year, while the United States is producing 50. And those are actually not brand new tanks. Those are, they're taking the 1967 Mustang and sprucing it up, putting new paint on it, new wheels, some lights. But so the disconnect here is profound. And it's going to come as a wake-up shock to Europe, to the United States, when Russia finishes off the victory against Ukraine. That's where it's headed.
Larry, Ray, last but not least, maybe you can help summarize this direction that the United States is headed, not just under Trump, but as a hegemon as a whole in its current, not just foreign policy direction, but where you see things headed as it navigates all of the dynamics that all three of you have laid out during this conversation.
Well, I would say this, that there is an argument for stability from the fact that Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, we have a 4-point axis of evil now, right? Are supremely confident that they can deal with the United States if they have to. Okay? That's why Putin is going in a very measured way in Ukraine. That's why the Chinese and the Russians are willing to convene in Moscow with Iranian delegations, experts, to see what happens at the White House. And North Korea, that has not even been mentioned. I think I should mention that. What about North Korea? Well, it surprised the hell out of me on 2 counts. One is, more than 2 years ago, we discovered that Russia gave North Korea its next to the best intercontinental ballistic missile ICBM called Topol M. Range, all of the United States. Sophistication, chaff, other things that you wouldn't believe to get these things through, decoys and so forth. Tested, twice tested now. What happened? It was ignored by U.S. intelligence. Ted Postal, a friend of ours, published on this under the auspices of the Institute for Strategic Studies. Okay, so Jake Sullivan is asked at a White House briefing, "What about the Topol M? My God, what? Oh yeah, we're aware of that. We're looking into that. That was 2 years ago. Okay, what am I saying here? I'm saying that Russia gave North Korea one of its most sophisticated ICBMs, which has the range of and get the capability of getting it through any defense the United States has. Okay, why was that? My God. Well, what else? A defense treaty. Not only a defense treaty, but a stronger defense treaty than the one with Iran. This is actually a mutual defense treaty where each side is obligated to come to the aid of the other in case the other is attacked. Okay. Article 4, Putin advertises, hey, we have this thing with North Korea. Article 4 is like the Article 5 in the NATO treaty. Okay. Why is all that? Well, I'm surprised. I used to think the North Koreans were a little bit more mercurial than the Russians would do these kinds of things, but they've done it. And that's the threat that Putin has acknowledged. He needs really strong allies, not only China, not only people like Ukraine, like the Iranians, but people like North Korea, who now have the capability to deter just about anything that the U.S. or South Korea might throw at them. So we used to talk about the correlation of forces in the old Soviet Union. It's changed. And the reason that I am hopeful that this can all end peaceably is that that a transactional Witkoff and Trump are smart enough to know when they don't have the high cards, and they're smart enough to back off. And it'll be hard, but the realities will appear, and they will back off starting this Saturday in Qatar, when we see this. The U.S. has not let Netanyahu run U.S. policy toward Iran. Now, am I sure of that? Of course I'm not. Let 100 flowers bloom. But I think that this past week gives us some reason to not despair, but rather to say, well, those people are not only very strong, the balance of power has shifted not only in their direction, but they're so supremely confident that they're going to come out of this okay, that they don't worry too much about what the U.S. is going to do. And when they do worry, they make sure their views are heard, and you get things like Trump naming Witkoff to go talk to whom? To the foreign minister of Iran. Direct, Trump says, these are direct talks. The head of Peshkashian, head of Iran, says, no, they're not. They're indirect talks. We've always insisted on indirect talks, and that's what they're going to be. Well, is Witkoff going anywhere? Of course he is. Let's see what happens. And call me if I'm wrong, and assume we all survive. But I think that there's more hope this week than 10 days ago, and I'm happy that there are 100 flowers blooming here, and we'll see.
Well said. Well said. Gentlemen, it was great to be.
Well, the biggest story in Washington right now is that neocons are pushing President Trump into a war with Iran. Former UK Ambassador Richard Dalton said this morning that the threat of war with Iran has never been higher. Watch.
How seriously do you take this from President Trump?
I do take it seriously. The risk of a war between Israel and the United States on the one hand and Iran on the other has never been higher. And that's because it's been Israel's aim for many years to strike Iran, and they've always wanted to attract the United States to their side to do it because of limitations in Israel's capabilities, particularly in sustaining a long war. This is chiefly about weakening Iran as a state. Iran.
Yeah. So doing Israel's bidding. That's why Benjamin Netanyahu was in Washington yesterday. Neocons would love nothing more than carrying out Netanyahu's fantasy of destroying Iran. Well, Trump may have just thrown a monkey wrench into those neocon plans. Just yesterday, Iran was, of course, brushing off the idea of sitting down with the United States, saying direct talks were basically pointless because, according to them, Washington can't go 5 minutes without some sort of a threat of military action, which is actually true. We like to do that. But then fast forward to today, and then suddenly the script is totally flipped. And just wait until you see Netanyahu's reaction. It's priceless. On Monday, Donald Trump dropped a surprise announcement that high-level U.S. officials will be meeting directly with Iranian leaders.
No, they won't. Iran said no direct talks. There will be a third party. Trump's lying.
This coming weekend, and they've actually, Iran confirmed this and actually released the date and time of where this was going to happen.
No, Iran did not confirm that. Iran came out and said the total opposite, and that's why Iran met with China and Russia today about their nuclear file, and they will not meet with Trump directly. It has to be a third party intermediary. Trump's not telling the truth.
Not through a proxy, not through Israel, but directly talking to Iran. He made it clear that the nuclear issue is still front and center, saying flat out that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, even though Trump's own intelligence community says that Iran's not developing a nuclear weapon. And Tulsi Gabbard in front of Congress confirmed that on the record.
And Barack Obama spent 8 years trying to prove it and never did.
Never could.
But sanctioned them to within an inch of their life.
So watch this. He admitted right in front of Netanyahu. And watch, he said, we're going to be holding talks with Iran this weekend, direct talks. And I don't know, this looked like a total blindside to Benjamin Netanyahu. Watch Benjamin Netanyahu's face when Trump let the cat out of the bag. Watch.
We're having direct talks with Iran, and they've started. It'll go on Saturday. We have a very big meeting, and we'll see what can happen. And I think everybody agrees that doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious. And the obvious is not something that I want to be involved with, or frankly, that Israel wants to be involved with if they can avoid it. So we're going to see if we can avoid it. But it's getting to be very dangerous territory. And hopefully those talks will be successful. And I think it would be in Iran's best interest if they are successful. We hope that's going to happen.
He looks like you ever see that Will Ferrell character where he's like a cat with a ball? He's like it's just like Benjamin Netanyahu's face the whole time. Like,
yeah,
it's really weird.
You know, in him saying, look, Israel doesn't want a war with Iran, and Netanyahu's like, I do.
He's like, don't speak
this
for
is
me.
the thing I've wanted my whole life. I will want for no more as soon as I get this. But it occurred to me that Trump is actually speaking on behalf of the people of Israel. Sometimes we think that Benjamin Netanyahu represents them. He doesn't. The people of Israel do not want a war with Iran. For the most part, they want peace. Who wouldn't? What crazy person would not, right? And so in that moment, I was like, Trump is a better president to Israel. That he continues to say, I'm the best president Israel has ever had. That might be true if he is able to supersede the war that their prime minister wants so badly.
So watch Netanyahu's face close up when he made this announcement.
We're having direct talks with Iran, and they've started. It'll go on Saturday. We have a very big meeting, and we'll see what can happen. And I think everybody agrees that doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious.
Yeah, and as John Spen in our chat says, yeah, that's true. That most Israelis do not support Benjamin Netanyahu. October 7th, he says, was because one half of Israel was out protesting Bibi. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the story again. No one was covering in the West, which was the thousands of people across Israel out in protest of Benjamin Netanyahu. And here's the part that should actually be making headlines everywhere. Somehow it isn't. If this breaks down, the threat of another endless war in the Middle East becomes very real. An Iran conflict, especially one backed by the usual neocon voices in Washington, would be catastrophic for the United States, not just for that region as well, but for American forces and America itself. Here's what Tucker had to say about this. Whatever you think of tariffs, it's clear that now is the worst possible time for the United States to participate in a military strike on Iran. We can't afford it. Thousands of Americans would die. We'd lose the war that follows. Nothing would be more destructive to our country. And yet we're closer than ever thanks to unrelenting pressure from neocons. This is suicidal. Anyone advocating for conflict with Iran is not an ally of the United States, but an enemy. And by the way, talk to members of the military, the U.S. military. I was on a flight this weekend and had the pleasure of speaking with a United States member of the Army. And said, oh, my God, these guys agitating for war with Iran, they're crazy. They're crazy. It would be devastating. They know it. We know it. Our military experts we've had on this show, like Colonel McGregor and others, have pointed out how devastating it would be. Thousands of miles away, you're going to go right into a hornet's nest. You've got 50,000 American troops that are sitting ducks right now in this region. It would be devastating. But yet you have all these B-2 bombers, which are now have been put on high alert. There are more now in this region than ever before in Diego Garcia as of this morning. So they are agitating quickly to get us into this war.
Have you read the comments on Tucker's post?
On this post, I read a lot of them. Yeah.
Some of them are so crazy. So crazy. People saying, well, we couldn't win a war, so we shouldn't get in it. Yeah. That.
People are like, yes. Oh, Tucker, you don't think we're strong enough to win a war against Iran? No, we're not. We are absolutely not. You want to know what happens if we enter a war with Iran? Russia steps in.
Right.
We've already proven that we cannot win a war against Russia. We've tried for more than 2 years with U.S. arms using, and by the way, not even using our own soldiers, using a proxy, and we can't do crap. We've lost massive amounts of territory. We would absolutely lose in a war with Iran.
I don't understand that logic. That even though we know we'd lose, we should do it anyway. Like, should I go do MMA fighting, knowing that I'll lose now, just to see what it makes of me?
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Take those people down. Like, where does that? I don't understand. Please try to.
I'd pay to see that. By the way,
me too.
I'm pretty scrappy. I might get by for a little bit.
Tiny Hawaiian Latina mix. World face.
Global face.
Global. That would be your ring name. And welcome to the ring, Global Face.
Yep.
You never know.
I've got it.
She might throw a pineapple at you or come at you with something else.
You never know. Okay.
I hit below the belt if it comes to. Okay. Redacted is brought to you by Ground News. This is a service we use all the time because Ground News is a great way, fun at the fact that most of the things, and let's acknowledge this, let's be honest, most of the things we're using, our computers, our clothes, they are made by people who work very hard and are a lot more adept at it. And we are the beneficiaries of that. And so they're kind of poking fun at the fact that we may not be able to do it this way. Watch this. Yeah, it's rude.
They're basically saying you guys are all fat and lazy and the United States cannot compete with our manufacturing because we're the best. you watch this. This is not like a veiled comment.
That hurts my feelings.
And you hear the little Chinese music in the background
Does
as
it hurt
well.
your feelings?
Yeah. I mean, basically calling lazy and fat, right?
Yeah.
Like we don't have the capacity to do it. And because it's all been offshored, they literally have a lot of these factory workers that live like right on site.
Yes.
So they work, what is it? Like, I don't know how many hours a day, not 8.
Well,
and
look,
then they live in the place where they're working.
one of the reasons the Silicon Valley became the Silicon Valley is because the access to so many Asian immigrants. And in the book, What the Dormouse Said, the chip makers admit that they need small Asian ladies with small hands.
Yeah.
We still have those. We got some, but the question remains, those are immigrants. Could we actually do it ourselves? I guess we're about to find out and put our money where our mouth is, huh?
I mean, we're literally going, I mean, this is a war. It's maybe not a kinetic war yet, hopefully, but this is a war. Treasury Secretary Bessent said this morning that China is playing the wrong hand here. They're only holding a pair of twos right now, he said. And he said it's a major mistake for them to escalate. Watch.
As I said, many of our trading partners, they have queued up and they have kept their cool. They have not escalated, and they will get priority in the queue. I think it was a big mistake, this Chinese escalation, because they're playing with a pair of twos. Traditionally, if you look at the history of the trade negotiations, we are the deficit country. So what do we lose by the Chinese raising tariffs on us? We export 1/5 to them of what they export to us. So that is a losing hand for them.
So, as a professor of economics, him, not me, he points out that the debtor always has a stronger hand in a, trade surplus, trade deficit. And because they export so much to us, they are holding a pair of twos in their hand right now,
right?
Which is really interesting. But there appears to be, though, some softening on China's side, and it appears that they might actually be willing to talk. And President Trump just posted this on Truth Social. It's long, but I'll cut to the end here because he's talking about other countries. But he talks about China wants to make a deal badly, but they don't know how to get it started. We're waiting for their phone call. It will happen. God bless the United States. But in the meantime, these 104% tariffs are going to hit. So while they try to figure out how to get on the phone, call President Trump.
Someone in our chat says, yeah, we don't have small Asians, but we have kids. No, that's not what we're advocating.
Let's get the child labor out. Oh, my God. Upton Sinclair, are you rolling over his grave? Yeah.
All right. Also, we got some news this morning over the Biden administration's handling of China during COVID. It turns out they went out of their way to protect China during the pandemic. This should not be a surprise to you, but it is a surprise to see it in writing. Other people admitting it. I guess when you've received millions of dollars, you're going to defend the person who was sending that money to you. The Biden family is. According to news in the Free Beacon, the Biden administration may have quietly sat on a military document from 2022 suggesting something pretty major, that 7 U.S. service members might have come down with COVID just months before China even acknowledged that the virus existed. This traces back to 2019 in Wuhan at the military games. What's wild is that this report was supposed to be made public by law, but it never was. The Biden administration buried it. So why? Why do you think they did that? What are
Could it be all the money? Could it be all the money that the Bidens received from China?
I'm just very curious.
It's an idea. Yeah. And so it was a lie. It never saw the light of day. It throws a wrench into the official story that we've been told, of course, especially the claims that no U.S. troops were affected during those games. That was a lie. A bald-faced lie by the Biden administration. Shocking, I know. And if it holds up, if this report holds up, and it appears to be legitimate, it lends more weight to the theory that, yes, the virus did come from the lab, and something that the CIA has now confirmed and admitted to be true, although quietly. So why bury this whole thing?
I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Well, remember this guy? You guys remember this guy? What a handsome devil this guy is. Ryan Routh. Well,
looks
Pam
like a
Bondi's
skinny Gary Busey.
Maybe a more sane Gary Busey. Well, perhaps. Maybe Pam Bondi's DOJ has just revealed that Trump assassin Ryan Routh tried to buy military weapons from Ukraine to kill President Trump, including a rocket launcher. So just if a gun didn't work, a rocket launcher would have. According to the indictment, take a look at this. Routh asked the Ukrainian military for a Stinger RPG to take out Trump because Trump would be, quote, bad for Ukraine. He communicated all of this, by the way, using the Signal application, which we now know, you use Signal. It's like lots of criminals using Signal, right? He attempted to acquire anti-aircraft weapons as direct evidence of his assassination attempt. All done on Signal, by the way. That month, Routh sought to purchase the devices online from an associate believed to be a Ukrainian with access to military weapons. The two discussed this all over Signal. In July of 2024, the attempt on President Trump's life in Butler, Pennsylvania was, quote, he wished that he was the one who had carried it out, and that he wished that he had been assassinated. It also talks about in this indictment, that it proves planning, motive, and the intent to kill President Trump. And they want this information made admissible during a trial because it shows that he actively was trying to assassinate him. And they found this on his phone, of course. The two went back and forth, began discussing Routh's purchase of a weapon in August. Routh told his associate to, quote, send me an RPG or a Stinger and I'll see what we can do. Trump is not good for Ukraine.
How do you just ship?
And then he asked them to ship it to him.
How do you just do that?
I mean, I guess
from
maybe
Ukraine,
possibly like a CIA asset, right? Because my question is, no one was in Ukraine, no American, and we've talked about this with CIA whistleblowers and military experts on our show. There's no way that he was in Ukraine when he was, and that our CIA and deep state didn't know that he was there. They absolutely knew that he was there. So then here's the question. Did Ukraine know about this plot in advance? We know the CIA totally controls Ukraine, as even the New York Times has reported. So then does the CIA know?
Crazy dude, Ukraine is really important, and the United States needs to continue to support their efforts to go to war with Russia, but not so important that they can't spare a weapon or two for him to kill Donald Trump. That's how he would think.
Yeah, well, he basically says in this, he says this in his Signal messages that they won't know where they are. He said that he admitted that Ukraine receives our weapons and then sells them off to the highest bidder. He basically acknowledged in these documents that they get lost all of the time on the battlefield, and no one would miss them, he said. Tucker recently talked about Ukraine's selling of these weapons. Watch.
Second fact, not guess, fact is the Ukrainian military is selling a huge percentage, up to half of the arms that we send them. Half. And I'm not guessing about this. I know that for a fact, okay? Not speculation. And they're selling it, and a lot of us winding up with the drug cartels on our border. So this is a crime, what's happening. Our intel agencies are fully aware of this. You tell me they're not profiting from this. Of course, you think CIA is not profiting from this? Yes, they are. I can't prove that, but I believe that. What they don't know this. I know this, but they don't know this. They know this. And no one is saying it. Like, no American seems aware of this. We're sending these arms to Ukraine, hundreds of billions of dollars, and it's being stolen and sold to our actual enemies. Like, what the? I'm trying not to swear. What is this?
Yeah, well, the reason why is because you have Zelensky, it was about 3 weeks ago, I think, was specifically asked this question. So he went at some length in one of his interviews to say, oh, no, absolutely not. There's no truth to that at all. We've implemented all this thing. I know that, but the media just reported what he said.
The New York Times could get on the web and order Ukrainian weapons. That's a fact. I'm not guessing. It's a fact.
Yeah, and they can be used to
I guess it's
assassinate
easy
President
then.
Trump. Very, very easy. So many of you asking in the chat room, when is this guy's trial going to take place? Is that scheduled? It's scheduled for September 8th, 2025. So he's got a long spring and summer to be sitting behind bars. If he's sentenced, he could be sentenced to life in prison if convicted. I want to tell you about our friends at Bunker, because you might have heard all these stories lately about like Signal and all these like bad guys using Signal and all of these leaks and everything. I just want to tell you about our friends at Bunker, because Bunker has been a great sponsor for Redacted. They're having a tremendous growth thanks to viewers like you who've downloaded the app, gone to the App Store and picked it up. High net worth families, law enforcement agents, professional athletes, tactical response trainers are trusting Bunker to protect their lives from surveillance, from cyber criminals, and other threats. If you join them, here's what you get. Bunker is an uncompromised private messenger together with a password manager, a
You remember that crazed Beatles song that was driven by psychotic, drug-taking adventures called Helter Skelter? It ended with the thud of the Sharon Tate mass murder episode with Charles Manson and his crew. It always struck me as a satanic song. It always struck me as a song that was leading us down a helter-skelter to disaster. That's how I currently feel about the world economic and political situation. It may very well be that we have dodged World War III in the Ukraine, but the Europeans are doing their best to make sure that's not so. It may very well be that Donald Trump intends to make the deal. It is his leitmotif, after all, with the Iranian government in Tehran, although Israel is doing its best to make sure that isn't so. And Donald Trump has, like Liz Truss before him, having wrecked the economy, had to make a spectacular, screeching U-turn, the kind of U-turn that the currently unsellable American cars find it very difficult to make. After promising condign tariff punishments all over the globe, and being met by stiff resistance from some and less than stiff from others. How did Vietnam get to be in such a supine state vis-a-vis the United States? After all that sacrifice, I find myself unavoidably asking. But the big enchilada is that Trump has not just doubled down, but I've lost count now of the multiples. The last time I looked, though it is changing, last night it changed from above 100% tariffs on China. I think it was 104. It has half that number again has now been added to the US tariff on China. And China has responded with 184% tariffs on American goods and services coming into China. It's almost unimaginable. And we're lucky we've got Professor Richard Wolff, one of the world's greatest economists, to help us through it tonight. And as I said earlier, we have one of the wisest men in Christendom, Judge Andrew Napolitano, a former Superior High Court judge in New Jersey, and a man who really should have been nominated by Donald Trump to the US Supreme Court. But Donald Trump often does things that harm himself and fails to do things that would have advantaged himself. I don't know who advised him that setting off a series of trade wars and tariff wars across the globe, just as he was steaming the aircraft carriers and battle groups into the Persian Gulf, just as he was assembling the B-2 bombers in Diego Garcia and in Qatar, and threatening the world with all-out war against the Islamic Republic of Iran, just when he was failing so far to bring about an end to the Ukraine war, it was a good idea to go to trade war across the globe, even including his closest allies, one of whom is referred to in our poll this evening. Will Trump get Greenland? Who cares? Frankly, is my own attitude to it, and Greenland is the least of our worries. But that's merely a benchmark as to how far we've gone in just 3 months of the Donald Trump presidency, because Denmark is one of America's most slavish, obedient allies, and Donald Trump is openly threatening to invade them, sever them asunder, and steal a very significant and important part of their national territory. He's not proposing to buy it, not like the Gaza Strip. Oh, wait, cancel that. He's no longer going to buy the Gaza Strip. He is merely going to have it. It was an interesting choice of phrase from Donald Trump, sitting next to his amanuensis, or is it the other way around, Benjamin Netanyahu in the Oval Office just this week. He said, we're not going to buy it, we're going to have it. And when asked by a journalist, under what authority? He said, under the US authority. He praised Netanyahu for giving up this wonderful oceanfront real estate in the interest of peace. He does not appear to know that the Gaza Strip has never belonged to Israel, that it is illegally occupied territory. And if he has it, as he says he's going to, he will be the illegal occupier of this wonderful real estate property. And by the way, the Mediterranean Sea is not an ocean, Donald. You have a lot to learn about the world. You have a lot to learn about geography. You have a lot to learn about history. You praised Erdogan and Turkey, as you call it. You praised them in front of Netanyahu in the Oval Office for having been the first people in 2,000 years to take over Syria, which rather ignores the fact that Turkey owned Syria for more than 400 years until the end of the First World War, and that then France took over Syria between the end of the Second World War and the eventual attainment of Syrian independence. So he doesn't know much about history. He doesn't know much about geography. I don't know how that song goes. Trigonometry, how are you with that, Donald? Well, you're about Liz Truss levels of economic management so far. Now, there may be method in all this madness. I'll be the first to admit I'm not the Nobel Prize winner for economics. But I do know this, that when the stock market of the United States loses $14 billion worth of wealth in just 2 days of trading, and when the virus of what you have released into the atmosphere spreads to all the stock markets of the world and all the shareholders, pension funds, and all the others who depend on rising stock markets are losing untold, uncountable hundreds of billions in wealth, you've probably not made the wisest decision. And when it's predicated upon forcing people to buy American goods, you run up against an immediate problem that I highlighted in the week and have been harvesting ever since. What is it exactly I'm supposed to buy from the United States? I buy Netflix. I'll grant you that. I buy internet services, possibly, although my telephone was made in China, and although my Netflix could be dispensed with if I really wanted to. The truth is, I can think of virtually nothing that I want to buy from the United States. Not fashion, thank you very much. I go Italian, me and Judge Napolitano. Not food. chlorinated chicken doesn't make my taste buds salivate. Not cars. Once upon a time, yes, in the 1950s, in the 1960s, before it became uneconomic to do so, I'd have probably thanked you for a Ford Mustang. I probably would have thanked you for a Buick or a Cadillac. But none of these things are practical any longer. And if you're offering me a Ford as opposed to a Mercedes or as opposed to a Volvo, I'm afraid I'm spoiled for choice on this side of the Atlantic. Trump seems to believe that the reason there are virtually no American cars on European streets is because of tariffs. But it isn't because of tariffs. It is that you have gutted your entire country of its industrial strength. Not you personally, though you didn't do as much about it in your first term as you claimed you were going to do. But American rulers for a century have been deindustrializing their country. And that deindustrialization is not the fault of the countries to which your capitalists exported their productive plant, machinery, and operations. Let me give you a very obvious example. I'm wearing black Levi 501s. That's no surprise because I do that every day. Not the same pair, but every day. Even in Parliament. I never entered Parliament without black Levi 501s. Scott Ritter, my good friend, leapt into the fray to say, we make Levi's. But you don't, Scott. I had to educate Scott. Levi's stopped producing their product in America in 2005. And only their high-end products continued to be made there until 2020. Now, Levi's produces nothing in America. So you see, even the iconic American brands are all produced elsewhere. And they're not coming back because you can get somebody in Indonesia or in Thailand or in Vietnam to sit at an assembly line and sew pairs of Levi's for very low wages. You will not get the American workforce to do that. That is just a matter of economic fact. So much for the economic front. What about the war front? Well, leaving aside Trump's lack of geography and history and trigonometry qualifications, he doesn't seem to know what he's doing on the military front either. He spent $250 billion firing rockets at Yemen, moving military assets towards Yemen, the poorest country in the world, where the fighters, the warriors of Yemen are still carrying the weapons that they've carried for millennia in some cases and for a century in others. They live in the mountains. They fight from the mountains. They, like the Vietnamese before them, are deep underground in tunnels. They are deep underground in caves. Trump seems to imagine that the use of vastly expensive, lethal firepower fired from platforms that are themselves floating, sitting ducks is the way forward in an irregular war against a guerrilla adversary, as if he never heard of Afghanistan, as if he didn't know that the United States was driven out of Afghanistan for precisely those same reasons. That kind of American warfare didn't work against the Vietnamese, didn't work against the Afghans, and sure ain't going to work against the Yemenis. Now, it may very well be that the Yemen front was all merely, how shall I put it, a proxy war to terrify the Iranians. But that too, if so, has singularly failed. The Iranians are not terrified at all. The Iranians would rather die than bow the knee to Donald Trump. Donald Trump, above all, the man who cold-bloodedly assassinated the hammer of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, General Soleimani, just in his last term. The Iranians are not afraid of the Americans. The Iranians are more than capable of fighting back against the Americans. Certainly far more capable than the Taliban, far more capable than the Viet Cong. They are a ballistic superpower. They are a drone weapon superpower. And guess what? Their two closest friends, Russia and China, are nuclear-armed superpowers too. The biggest amount of Iranian oil ever was sold by Iran to China this week. Iran is a super important ally and friend of the People's Republic of China. Ditto the Russians, who've just sent their latest MiGs to Tehran, have already installed their electronic warfare capabilities to Tehran, already given the S-20 anti-aircraft batteries long ago. The Iranians are now expert at making them. The Iranian drone technology is so good, people are queuing up to buy it from all over the world. So if you're going to attack Iran, it is a very spiky porcupine indeed. And the spines will not just hit the United States personnel on the ground, strewn out across the region in military bases, but will have devastating effect on the United States' closest friends and allies in the region, and will bring oil and gas production in the entire region to a halt. Now, oil has already fallen to $57 a barrel on the back of the fears of recession. Not so much fears, certainty of recession caused by the current instability in the world economic situation. But you will not be able to get any oil at any price. You won't be able to get any exports of gas at any price if the balloon goes up between the United States and Iran. Now, on that subject, I come to Benjamin Netanyahu. Marco Rubio issued a pronunciamento this very day, at least I saw it this very day, in which he said, Israel has never had a better friend in the White House than Donald Trump. I replied, that's not quite the recommendation that you think it is. And lo and behold, new polling evidence proves that for the first time ever, the majority of US adults disapprove of the United States' relationship with Israel. 53% of US adults said yes to the question, do you disapprove of the United States' relationship with Israel? This is a seismic and significant shift. And it's a shift that has taken place despite the total blackout of any countervailing narrative on the Israel-Palestine question available on any mainstream media in America, which shows that social media is the king in the United States. For that is the only possible explanation for the fact that more people, more than half the people in the United States, no longer fancy Israel much. But Donald Trump has gone all in for Benjamin Netanyahu. And it makes you wonder why. I know people say it's because of Miriam Adelson and her husband before, but look, we Irish have a saying, eaten bread is soon forgotten. Adelson's donation has already been spent. Her husband's already spent in the first term. Trump isn't running again for president. He doesn't need any more donations from anyone. Anyway, by the end of this presidency, he'll be as rich as Croesus unless he's got it all in the US stock market. So it's not, for me, entirely explicable by donations, by campaign finance contributions. I think it's something deeper and darker than that. I think Donald Trump has been Jeffrey Epsteined. Discuss, I will, with Judge Andrew Napolitano right now after. His Eminence, Judge Andrew Napolitano, is the host of Judging Freedom, a must-watch podcast, and he's a former New Jersey Superior Court judge. And I saw someone lamenting the other day and concurred, a great pity that, it was Roger Stone actually, a great pity that Trump had not appointed Judge Napolitano to the Supreme Court. But in that event, he wouldn't have been here on the mother of all talk shows. So it's an ill wind that bears nobody any good. Your Honor, Judge Napolitano, wonderful to see you again. I wonder if we could start with the turmoil on the economic, financial front. Is there method in this madness, or is it just madness?
I wish I could understand the method to the madness, George. And let me actually start by thanking you for inviting me to the show. We've been friends and collaborators for a long time. You were on my show recently. The numbers went through the roof, the numbers of viewers, and I'm happy and thrilled to be on your show with you. I've been a fan for many years, even, as you know, before we actually met. I don't know if there's a method to his madness. In my view, and in the view of most legal scholars who've looked at this, what he did was absolutely unlawful and totally unconstitutional. The Constitution authorizes the Congress to raise taxes, not the president. A tariff is a sales tax. Okay, they gave him authority to impose this tariff in the case of an emergency, and then they defined emergency as a sudden and unexpected event which adversely affects national security or economic prosperity. The so-called emergency was the American, stated by Trump in his executive order, George, was the American imbalance of trade. That's been the case since 1934, so it's hardly a sudden and unexpected event. So there's no legal basis for what he's doing. Can the Congress impose tariffs? Well, yes, it could, but that would be after a great public debate in which the Congress made prudential judgments about how to manage the government's economic woes. When the president makes a wild, wild decision like this on his own, and it causes the loss of 6 to 7 trillion in shareholder value, although, as you know, some of that is now coming back since he, in the past half hour, suspended the tariffs that he imposed last week on all countries except China. It makes one wonder if he understands economics 101. I say this as a friend of his, and if he knows what he's doing.
Yes, and this show was happy that he, rather than Kamala Harris, became the president. So we don't depart from a standpoint of wishing him failure. To the contrary, but he's doing his best, Your Honor, to disappoint, if not to shatter, the hopes that so many people had on this front and on the war front.
Yes, on the war front, about which you spoke right before the break, with respect to Israel, in my view, he is worse than Joe Biden. He has totally and completely unleashed Benjamin Netanyahu to resume the genocidal slaughter of the Palestinian people. Moreover, I'm of the view that the statement Trump issued, which was interpreted by the BBC and by The Economist magazine as a disappointment to Prime Minister Netanyahu, was a head fake intended to lull the American people and the Iranians into a false sense of security. Netanyahu's domestic problems are over the top and out of control and will consume him, and he knows it, unless he brings Israel to war. And he knows that he cannot bring Israel to war without the United States. Now, that raises a whole host of other problems that involve a couple of fellows named Putin and Xi. And it depends on how smart Donald Trump is as to whether or not he goes along with what Netanyahu desperately needs. But he cannot call himself a man of peace. He is still funding the war in Ukraine. It will stop in 2 weeks when he turns off the spigot that Joe Biden opened 3.5 years ago. And even worse, he's paying for 100% of the slaughter in Gaza. What kind of a man of peace is that?
Indeed, the whole shtick that he was hoping for a Nobel Peace Prize and so on, it all seems so long ago now, and he's only been in 3 months. It is quite an extraordinary turn of events and not entirely explicable to me, because I got the feeling before that Trump didn't like Netanyahu very much. Trump's an alpha male, obviously, and he tends not to like the being in the presence of other alpha males. He tends to like people like little Macron that he can pat on the head and push around. And Netanyahu is, of course, not that kind of guy. So I got the feeling that Trump would not actually go the extra mile for Netanyahu. But in his ravings about Gaza, and they are ravings, I mean, the ravings in every sense. When he says Israel gave up the Gaza ocean front property, the Mediterranean being a sea, not an ocean, and Israel never had it to give it up. It is, as you well know, Your Honor, internationally, legally recognized as occupied territory, a status only recently reinforced by the last judgment of the ICJ, the highest court in the world. He seemed to think that he, under the authority of the United States, could simply have the Gaza Strip, when legally all he'd be doing was making America the illegal occupier rather than Israel.
His statement in the Oval Office in the presence of Prime Minister Netanyahu that Israel gave up the Gaza Strip probably galled Netanyahu as well, because it is so profoundly inaccurate. It's been Palestine for about 4,000 years. The Israelis have attempted to seize it, and it's been an open-air concentration camp there since 1948. Trump has designs on it to develop it. I mean, that to me is a gross and irresponsible statement to come out of the mouth of the President of the United States. If you want to give him credit, maybe he's playing games with Netanyahu. Maybe he's not. Maybe he likes him. Maybe he doesn't. But he's financing the slaughter of innocent people, and there's no justification for that, and there's no credit to be given for that. There's nothing but condemnation. George, I was surprised at the poll numbers that you read. Those polls are not publicized here in the West. Here in the United States, you can sense a feeling that enough is enough. But you have to get that feeling on shows like yours and mine. You won't get it where I worked for 24 years on Fox News. You won't get it from reading the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or the New York Times. You won't get it from CBS, ABC, NBC, or the BBC. You'll only get it from the alternative media. But I guess it's starting to resonate. Those numbers that you quoted a few moments ago, polls of Americans were extraordinary. 57% opposing this policy. The policy is ruinous for the United States. It has isolated not only Israel, but the United States as international pariahs.
Indeed so, and they are remarkable, given the blackout of truth on almost every medium, with the exception of yours, mine, the Grey Zone, and one or two others. You really have to search for the truth about the Israel-Palestine conflict in the US and in Britain for that matter, though more in the US. And yet now a clear majority of US adults say they disapprove of the current US relationship to Israel. That is something Trump should pay attention to, unless he's not able to, Your Honor. I postulated, you're his friend, I'm not. I postulated there's something dark about this. It can't just be about previous donations, because eaten bread is soon forgotten, as I'm sure Italian Americans also know, as well as Irish people. These donations are all in the past. They've all been spent. I'm wondering if he's compromised, if there's the Israeli equivalent of, you know, a P-gate tape on Trump that keeps him in the fold, as it were.
Well, the Mossad has a reputation for being extremely effective at controlling people. I would like to think that it is the money angle, not just with him, but with everybody around him, including about 95% of the United States Congress, which receives substantial donations from AIPAC. You know what AIPAC is, of course, as do your viewers and listeners. You did suggest in the segment before you brought me on that his involvement with the late monster, Jeffrey Epstein, might be held above his head in a way so as to control his behavior. I don't know. I hope that's not the case. That would be a severe and extreme form of blackmail, but you can't put anything past Mossad. Mossad is so devoted to the concept of the apartheid Jewish state that it'll do anything it can to keep the money flowing.
Let's turn, Your Honor, to the Chinese front, because that's what will be grabbing the headlines later tonight and tomorrow morning. Trump's latest, and as I say, it's only the latest because it's developing, as you say, by the half hour, is 154% tariffs on China. China's responded with 180% in retaliation. These numbers become a joke, don't they? Effectively, we're in a
do, and they've actually gone up. They've gone up since we began this broadcast.
Well, there you go. I mean, where is all this heading, Judge?
He can't bully China.
I wish I knew where it is heading. You talk about alpha males. You have two in Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping, neither of whom is prepared to back down. I am hoping that the three of them will be in Moscow on May 9th to celebrate that day in Russian history, and that the three of them will sit down with their aides and translators and work out some kind of a new reset, a new economic relationship. Maybe that's just wishful thinking, but you have to add to this the rantings and ravings of my former Fox colleague, who's now the Secretary of Defense, who last week in Japan faced China and threatened them and said, "Don't you dare think about doing anything with Taiwan because we'll be here to defend it." I mean, the military people will tell you, and I'm sure they have, that it is inconceivable that the United States could defend against the Chinese Navy and military if they want Taiwan, and no good purpose is served by threatening China. So you have the threat to China from Secretary Hegseth, and now you have these absurd and ridiculous tariffs. If you want to buy a toaster at Walmart or Amazon in the United States, last week it cost you $25. Now it costs you $100. Now, if you're interested in saving money on the toaster, you're not going to spend $100. And if you're looking for an American-made toaster, you're not going to find one at all. So who is Trump hurting? Trump's hurting what we call Joe Sixpack wearing a red MAGA cap, basically his blue-collar base. That's who he's hurting when he imposes these absurdly high triple-digit tariffs.
Indeed so. That seems to me, I'm not an economist, but that seems to me the obvious point that tariffs are going to be a blow to the standard of living of an American working class, which has already suffered so much ever since Clinton and the NAFTA, and the deindustrialization. I mean, once upon a time, the best toasters would have been yours. Now,
yes,
none of the toasters are yours. We'd have been looking at, an Art Deco toaster of the typical American brand, but now that no longer exists. So you're going to have to go without the toaster. You're not going to pay $100 for a toaster that last week was 25. Right. And if you have to, you're going to blame President Trump for it. How are his ratings holding up in this maelstrom?
You know, they're about 45-45. So 45 approval, 45 disapproval, and some brain dead 10% of people have no opinion. The definitive polls come out over the weekend. I don't know what they will show. I don't know if they will show that Trump came to a sense of reason, or that the public thinks that he really didn't know what he was doing in the first place with this imposition of tariffs and then reduction of all of them except on China. The impression that most of us have is that he doesn't get basic economics 101. He hasn't been able to produce a single reputable economist, progressive, libertarian, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, academic, or industrial. No credible economist has supported what he's been doing. And even some of his strongest allies in the United States Senate have condemned it. It's too early to evaluate what he did this afternoon here in the U.S. afternoon by removing the tariffs on everyone except China. But those polls will be reflected when they're taken this weekend.
Now, finally, as an eminent jurist, you're familiar with the concept of habeas corpus. Can you produce the corpse, the body of Joe Biden? Is he still alive? Why haven't we heard anything from him? After all, just a few months ago, he was sharp as a tack behind closed doors and ready for another 4 years in the White House. Now, it's as if he was no longer alive. What can you tell us about him and the party that he led?
The books are starting to come out. The early drafts are starting to be leaked. That even his closest advisors were brokenhearted, to use the phrase of my friend George Stephanopoulos. George is at ABC News and a former advisor to President Clinton, but a very prominent journalist who knew Joe Biden for many years. Brokenhearted at the Joe Biden that they saw in the last year of his presidency. Did any of them ring a bell? No. Did any of them go to Kamala Harris and say, it's time to trigger the 27th Amendment, which would allow her to become acting president in the case of the president's disability? No, they all hid this stuff. They're all going to be embarrassed and humiliated for having done so. But in terms of where is he, I must tell you, in my view, and of course I'm not a physician, he's really incapable of making any intelligent comments today, because we have not heard one word from him since Donald Trump became president, even though Trump has undone much of what Joe Biden did.
So where does that leave the Democrats? With Kamala Harris? Or are they going to skip a generation and go to a younger Kamala Harris by the name of AOC?
I think the latter is more likely than the former. I don't know if it will be AOC. It might be, even though his track record is terrible, he's very articulate and attractive. It might be the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. It might be somebody that we can't put our finger on them now. Or Donald Trump might just hand this to the Democrats if he keeps plucking people off the streets. This is where I thought you were going when you mentioned habeas corpus, and locking them up without due process. And if he keeps wrecking the economy, he may give the Democrats a dream that they never imagined they would have, which is a really competitive race in their primaries that would produce a really strong candidate.
Welcome to Make Africa Great. This is the voice of a continent that's watching the world shift and preparing to rise. Today, we bring you a powerful story of conflict, consequence, and opportunity. China has just announced a stunning move, an 84% tariff on U.S. goods. The global trade war is back, hotter than ever. But here's what matters. What does this mean for Africa? What role do we play, and what power can we claim? To understand this moment, we must go back. The US-China trade war didn't begin yesterday. It began years ago, rooted in tension, mistrust, and power struggles. America accused China of unfair trade practices, stealing intellectual property, manipulating currency, flooding markets with cheap goods. In response, President Donald Trump launched tariffs. China retaliated. The two superpowers locked horns, and the world braced for impact. Fast forward to now, 2025. The U.S. has reignited the conflict, announcing 104% tariffs on key Chinese imports: electric vehicles, tech components, solar panels. In response, China strikes back, an 84% tariff on American goods. This isn't just diplomacy, it's economic warfare, and every nation connected to global trade, including Africa, is now in the crossfire. Markets trembled, oil prices fell. Brent crude dropped below $60 a barrel, a warning sign for oil producers everywhere. Stock markets in Europe, Asia, and yes, Africa reacted with uncertainty. Investors scrambled. Economists debated. But beneath the panic, a question emerged. Who stands to gain? Who stands to lose? While the US and China punish each other with tariffs, global trade routes shift. Countries like Vietnam, Mexico, and Indonesia are stepping in as new supply chain hubs. But Africa, rich in resources, youth, and untapped markets, is uniquely positioned to rise. Africa isn't just watching from the sidelines. We are players on this global stage. China is Africa's largest trading partner. The US isn't far behind. Our exports, oil, gold, cocoa, lithium, are vital to both superpowers. But we're not just suppliers. Africa is building its own future, together. In 2021, the African Continental Free Trade Area was launched, AFCFTA, a dream decades in the making. It aims to unite 54 countries under one massive trading bloc, removing barriers, increasing intra-African trade, and creating a single market of 1.4 billion people. In a world of rising walls, Africa is opening doors. We are creating our own demand, our own supply, our own destiny. Every disruption holds a door to opportunity. As Chinese and American firms face rising tariffs, they're looking for new places to build, source, and sell. Africa is that place. Ethiopia's industrial parks, Kenya's expanding tech hubs, Nigeria's growing fintech sector, Rwanda's clean governance and rapid digitization. We are no longer a passive destination for aid. We are strategic partners in the next phase of global growth. Logistics hubs like Lekki Port in Nigeria and the Standard Gauge Railway in East Africa are game changers. We are not waiting for the world to come to us. We are building our own path forward. Of course, the road ahead isn't without risk. A global slowdown means lower demand for African exports. Falling oil prices affect Nigeria, Angola, and others. Agricultural markets become volatile. Politically, the pressure is real. China wants loyalty. The US demands alignment. Africa must walk a careful line, diplomatically neutral, but economically bold. Debt is also a concern. Chinese infrastructure loans and Western development funds must be managed carefully. The danger isn't choosing sides, it's losing focus on our own priorities. Let's zoom in. Nigeria is facing the oil price shock, but also pushing hard for diversification in tech, creative industries, and local manufacturing. Rwanda is proving that size doesn't limit impact, becoming a case study in clean governance and digital innovation. Kenya is emerging as a logistics and fintech leader in East Africa. South Africa, with its developed markets and strong banking sector, remains a continental anchor. And Ethiopia, despite political hurdles, is turning heads with Chinese-backed industrial zones. These are not random success stories. These are signs. Africa is not one story. It's a mosaic of momentum. So, what should Africa do now? Double down on AFCFTA, create value chains inside the continent, invest in manufacturing, digital economies, and youth skills, negotiate fair trade terms with all partners, and above all, unite. Unity is not a slogan, it's a strategy. If 54 countries move together, the world won't just notice, they'll adapt to us. Welcome to Make Africa Great, the channel where we inspire, inform, and empower Africans to rise, take charge of our destiny, and shape a stronger future. Today, we're diving into a major international development. China has just issued a travel warning to its citizens about visiting the United States. But this isn't just about China and the US. This is about Africa, about us. The world is shifting, superpowers are clashing, and we as Africans must ask, where do we stand? And more importantly, where are we going? Today, we're going beyond the headlines. Yes, China just warned its citizens to avoid traveling to the United States. But this isn't just about global superpowers. It's about Africa. It's about you and me. Because when giants clash, those of us in the middle must choose. Do we get crushed or do we rise? Stick with me, because what you're about to hear is more than news. It's a wake-up call for a continent ready to lead. On April 9th, 2025, China's Ministry of Culture and Tourism made a bold move. They issued a travel warning to their own citizens about traveling to the United States. Why? Because of escalating tensions, because of fear, because the world's so-called most powerful nations are once again in conflict. The US had just slapped massive tariffs on Chinese goods, raising them to 104%. China struck back, increasing tariffs on American products to 84%. But this isn't just about trade. China also mentions security risks, random violence, and rising discrimination in the US. And for students, a separate warning: reconsider studying in America. What we're seeing is the early stage of a new Cold War. But this time, it's not about missiles. It's about money, markets, and influence. When the world's giants fight, the rest of the world feels the tremors. And who usually suffers the most? The developing world. Nations without power, nations without unity, nations like ours. We've been here before, when the US and Soviet Union fought over ideology, when Europe carved up Africa for itself, when foreign interests dictated our economies. This time we have a choice. Will Africa once again be used in a global power game? Or will we finally step up and become a player in our own right? Africa is often called the sleeping giant, but it's time to wake up. Let's talk about what we already have. The youngest population on Earth, vast resources, from lithium to gold, 60% of the world's remaining arable land, and a spirit of resilience that no one can measure. So why are we still waiting for help? Why are we still choosing sides? America or China? The truth is, we don't need to pick a side. We need to pick ourselves, because Africa is not weak. We've just been told to believe that. Let's look at China itself. Just 50 years ago, China was struggling. Famine, poverty, political instability, and today, a global economic powerhouse. So how did they do it? They believed in their people. They protected their industries. They focused on education and infrastructure. They played the long game. They didn't wait for foreign aid. They built their own future. Africa can do the same, not by copying China, but by believing in ourselves. When elephants fight, the grass suffers. China gives us infrastructure loans. America gives us military aid. But both want something from us. They want our markets, our minerals, our influence. Here's the uncomfortable truth. We are still being used. It's time to stop choosing between powerful nations. It's time to stand tall as one. We need a new option. Team Africa. Let's stop talking about what others are doing and focus on what we must do. What does it take to build a great Africa? Trade with each other. The AFCFTA must become the heartbeat of our economies. Embrace African innovation. Support startups, build tech hubs, and make room for digital revolutionaries. Fix our education, not just to pass exams, but to create, build, lead, feed, and power ourselves. We have the land. We have the sun. Let's make it happen. Unite across borders. Pan-Africanism must become more than a dream. It must become policy, culture, life. This is how we rise. Let me remind you of who we are. Rwanda, from genocide to global respect. Kenya, a leader in mobile banking and digital innovation. Ghana, at the heart of West Africa's economic renaissance. Nigeria, home to billion-dollar startups and world-famous culture. South Africa, building energy and industry with local power. We are already great. We just have to see it and build on it. So let me speak directly to you now. If you're watching this, you're not just a viewer. You are part of the mission. Africa doesn't need another savior. Africa is the savior of itself. We need youth who build, not beg, leaders who listen, not lecture, elders who guide, not divide. This isn't about blaming others. This is about owning our future. The world is watching. Let them watch Africa rise. China is warning its people about America. The global order is shaking. But for Africa, this is a moment of truth. Will we remain dependent, or will we finally take the wheel? This is our time to create, to lead, to thrive. Let this video be a reminder, a spark, a challenge. Don't wait for change. Be the change. Together, let's make Africa great. If this message
China just burned its last bridge to the West's chip-making elite. No more ASML, no more TSMC. Not a pause, not a warning, just cut. And while Washington was still busy high-fiving itself over export bans, Beijing made a move that could blow up the whole semiconductor order. One that could put your phone, your car, and your future at the mercy of Chinese microchips. But why would China kill off the very companies it once depended on? What's hiding behind that door they just slammed shut? Stick around. Because what comes next isn't just about chips. It's about power. And it's about to get messy. On January 18, 2025, Beijing halted all future purchases and technical cooperation with ASML and TSMC, just 72 hours after the Dutch government canceled licenses for ASML's DUV exports to China. This wasn't a retaliatory tweet. It was a systemic shutdown. China imported $2.6 billion worth of lithography systems from ASML in 2023 alone, according to Chinese customs data. But when the Netherlands revoked service support for previously shipped machines under U.S. pressure, effectively bricking $15 billion in Chinese chip infrastructure, Beijing concluded that relying on foreign suppliers was no longer a risk. It was a liability. According to tech strategist Dan Wang at Geopolitical Dragonomics, this move isn't sudden. China has been waiting for the moment Western supply chains became more of a threat than a benefit. But cutting ASML and TSMC doesn't just burn a bridge, it forces China to pave its own. And fast. So how did the very sanctions meant to contain China end up pushing it to the edge of a chip revolution? The 2022 US sanctions were designed to paralyze China's semiconductor ambitions by blocking access to advanced chip-making tools, AI accelerators, and foreign talent. Instead, they ignited an investment spree. Between 2022 and 2024, China funneled over $75 billion into its domestic chip sector through state-backed funds, according to Bloomberg and NEF. Imports of semiconductor manufacturing equipment surged 33.8% year over year in 2024, despite export bans. The goal wasn't immediate self-sufficiency, it was rapid insulation. Sanctions accelerated a 10-year plan into a 3-year sprint, says Paul Triolo, head of tech policy at Albright Stonebridge Group. China also fast-tracked over 50,000 engineers into its chip ecosystem, many recruited from ex-Huawei and ex-Tsinghua Unigroup labs. The result? A fragmented but fast-adapting chip sector that's now closing the gap not in a decade, but potentially by 2026. But how do you build the future when you're banned from the present's best tools? ASML's EUV machines are $200 million marvels that use light 13.5 nanometers wide to etch impossibly small circuits. China can't legally import them, and likely won't for years. So it's doing the unthinkable, skipping them. In March 2025, Shenzhen-based SciCarrier claimed its new lithography tools can support sub-7 nanometer manufacturing using a proprietary DUV-based process. Independent validation is still underway, but Huawei's September 2023 Mate 60 Pro already shocked analysts by running a 7-nanometer chip made entirely with pre-banned tools. According to Tech Insights, SMIC achieved this by deploying triple patterning DUV processes, once thought unscalable. They're brute-forcing Moore's Law, says Dylan Patel of SemiAnalysis. It's inefficient, power-hungry, and expensive, but it works. China may not need EUV to get to 5 nanometers. And the 3 nanometer barrier? Let's just say Huawei's Kirin lab hasn't gone quiet. But adapting old tools isn't enough. You still need someone bold enough to push them to the edge. When Huawei's Mate 60 Pro dropped in August 2023, it wasn't the phone that made headlines, it was the chip inside. A 7-nanometer Kirin 9000s, made by SMIC, with zero foreign support. The teardown confirmed that SMIC used FinFET architecture and a DUV-only process to make what many assumed was impossible. Huawei followed with a December 2024 prototype, powered by a 5-nanometer class chip, reportedly using quad patterning and proprietary AI-assisted yield tuning. SMIC hasn't commented officially, but sources speaking to Nikkei Asia said they were producing experimental runs of near 3-nanometer class chips by early 2025. It's not scalable yet, defect rates are high, and yields are low, but it proves that with enough capital, software, and pressure, China can squeeze old tools into doing new tricks. And when your tech ecosystem is under siege, Breakthroughs don't come from comfort. They come from desperation. But what happens when desperation becomes doctrine? So, what does China gain by slamming the door on Western chip giants? Short-term loss, long-term dominance. By freezing out ASML and TSMC, Beijing is betting that the pain of immediate isolation is outweighed by the freedom of future sovereignty. In 2023, over 85% of China's high-performance chips were imported or manufactured externally. But by late 2024, that figure dropped below 60%, according to data from the China Semiconductor Industry Association. Cutting off ASML eliminates repair dependency. Cutting off TSMC removes vulnerability to geopolitical pressure. More importantly, it signals to domestic firms, no more crutches. The message from Beijing is clear, says George Yeo, former Singapore foreign minister and current chip strategist. If the West turns off the lights, we'll build our own electricity. In doing so, China gains full control over its military systems, AI infrastructure, and industrial upgrades without backdoors, delays, or diplomatic strings. But can an ecosystem built under pressure actually compete in a global market? If this were a poker game, China just called the West bluff with a straight flush made from recycled scrap. In 2020, China couldn't make a 14-nanometer chip without importing core IP. By the first quarter of 2025, it had already produced over 2.3 million 7-nanometer class chips, some found inside Huawei's Mate 60 Pro, using repurposed DUV machines and AI-enhanced lithography, according to Tech Insights. What began as damage control became disruption. SMIC's domestic market share jumped from 5% in 2020 to 19.3% in 2024, according to Bloomberg NEF. And that's not just survival, it's strategy. As China builds its own vertically integrated ecosystem, global suppliers are feeling the recoil. Dutch ASML saw its China-bound revenues drop 27% year-on-year in the fourth quarter of 2024. The tech economy isn't shifting. It's being reprogrammed. But if China's rewriting the code, who's getting erased next? We're not heading into a tech Cold War. We're already 3 acts in. In December 2024, Washington blocked NVIDIA from shipping its latest AI chip, the H20, to any entity linked to China's military civil fusion policy. Beijing answered by suspending exports of graphite and gallium, 2 elements the U.S. defense sector can't function without. According to Reuters, this caused a 16% price spike in advanced radar systems and EV batteries within 60 days. And just like that, the battlefield spread from fabs to factories. Academic blacklists followed. Over 410 Chinese researchers were recalled from U.S. institutions in the first 2 months of 2025, per the South China Morning Post. Every sanction sparks a mirror move. Every restriction births a workaround. And while no missiles have flown, the damage is very real. The tech is just the weapon. The war? It's everything underneath it. But what happens when both sides stop aiming at each other and start aiming at the markets? That's when every wire, every screen, every satellite runs through Beijing's blueprint. By late 2024, China had filed over 21,000 semiconductor patents, a 34% increase year-on-year, according to the China National IP Administration. This is volume and its vertical control. Huawei designs, SMIC fabricates, Changshin Memory seals the deal. And if China hits its 70% self-sufficiency goal by 2028, a target reaffirmed in Premier Li Qiang's National People's Congress speech in March, U.S. firms could find themselves locked out of a $1.2 trillion global market unless they play by China's tech stack. Think of it like Android and iOS, except one controls drones, satellites, and 5G grids across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. This isn't just a supply chain shift, says Chris Miller, author of Chip War. It's a realignment of global power. But if China's building an empire in silicon, what's happening to the consumer kingdom back home? Let's talk numbers. In February 2025, the U.S. Trade Office estimated that escalating tariffs on China-made components would raise smartphone prices by up to 41% over the next 18 months. An iPhone 16 Pro Max, That could hit $2,300 retail if Apple's Chinese parts pipeline dries up, according to Barclays supply chain analysis. Now zoom in, because your smart thermostat, your EV, your smartwatch, all of it relies on chips touched by either side of this war. And privacy? That's not a theoretical debate anymore. US manufactured chips are beholden to the Cloud Act. Chinese-made alternatives feed into Beijing's cybersecurity law. Where your data goes depends entirely on where your device was built. Consumers won't just choose brands, says Alex Capri of the Hinrich Foundation. They'll choose surveillance systems. And if you're thinking, well, I'll just avoid the conflict entirely, good luck. Because by 2026, 87% of connected devices globally will use components sourced from either US or Chinese supply chains. So if you're using a screen, you're in it, whether you like it or not. China didn't just say goodbye to ASML and TSMC, it slammed the door and locked it from the inside. And while Western firms scramble to uncouple, Beijing isn't backing off. It's doubling down. What started as a sanction response has become a blueprint for independence. For some, it's survival. For China, it's sovereignty. But here's the twist. The war might not stay on silicon. Because quietly, under the surface, Beijing has begun a slow-motion move that could destabilize everything, offloading US tech-linked assets and sovereign bond holdings in strategic batches. The chip war was Act 1. Act 2? It might hit Wall Street, and the fallout won't just be tech stocks. It might be retirement funds, mortgage rates, and the next recession. So, ask yourself, what happens when this stops being about chips and starts being about capital? Stick around. That storm is already forming. We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe.
Coffee. Follow me.